Chapter 3768. Xuanji Grotto Heaven had gathered close to 200 godly kings in the Grotto Heaven, waiting for the final battle. Once the myriad Demon League soldiers entered, they would definitely be ambushed from all sides. Xuanji Grotto Heaven had 3 times as many godly kings as the myriad Demon League, and more godly emperors. At that time, Xuanji Grotto Heaven, who had the advantage in numbers, would most likely win and kill the myriad Demon League soldiers. Ji Tianxing was deeply worried about this. However, he did not feel despair, and he would not give up on attacking. After all, the myriad Demon League had an advantage, and that was that they had peak godly king experts, but Xuanji Grotto Heaven did not. Ji Tianxing believed that as long as he handled it well, he could still destroy Xuanji Grotto Heaven. After observing for 3 days and 3 nights, Ji Tianxing had a rough understanding of Xuanji Grotto Heaven's situation. He decided to attack. Therefore, he sent a message to the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, Ao Jinying, and the others. His voice rang out in the divine bell world, and the tens of thousands of soldiers heard it clearly. Instantly, the tens of thousands of soldiers who were in the middle of healing or meditating all woke up. Everyone ended their cultivation and recuperation. They put on their armor and took out their divine weapons, preparing for the upcoming battle. Everyone's body was quickly accumulating divine power and emitting a strong fighting spirit. At the same time, Ji Tianxing controlled the primordial chaos bell and flew silently toward the white light vortex in the sky. At that moment, 2 intermediate godly kings flew over from the sea of clouds in the distance, heading straight for the white light vortex. Looking at the dusty appearance of the 2 godly kings, it was obvious that they had come from a remote area to help Xuanji Grotto Heaven fight against the myriad Demon League. Ji Tianxing chose to enter Xuanji Grotto Heaven at this moment because of the arrival of the 2 intermediate godly kings. That's right. He wanted to use the 2 intermediate godly kings to sneak into Xuanji Grotto Heaven. This was something that he had planned for a long time. At the same time, Hu Xinyu, Ao Jinying, and the others, as well as Xuanji Grotto Heaven, did not expect this. Everyone thought that with his army of 10,000, he would definitely attack the Xuanji Grotto with a murderous aura. At that time, he would display the strength of a peak divine king and forcefully break through the entrance of the Xuanji Grotto. He would then charge domineeringly. Meanwhile, the Xuanji Wonderland had long prepared for it. They would surely make him suffer a great loss. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing would never do that. That was the stupidest and most dangerous thing to do. Swoosh. Swish. In the blink of an eye, the 2 mid-level divine kings, who were wearing beast skin capes and armor, arrived near the white light vortex. The 2 of them stopped and scanned the area. When they saw the divine lord guards on the mountain peak, they could not help but exclaim in amazement. As expected of the Xuanji Grotto, the security is so tight. Not only are there over 1,000 divine lord guards, there are also over a dozen divine kings standing guard here. Just as the 2 of them were sighing in their hearts, 2 high-level god kings walked out of the 6 god kings guarding the entrance to the cave and came forward to interrogate them. "Sir, where are you from? What business do you have in the Xuanji Grotto?" The 2 high-level god kings in golden armor had their hands on the hilts of the sabers at their waists as they looked at the 2 visitors with dignified gazes. Ji Tianxing was not unfamiliar with these 2 high-level god kings guarding the entrance to the grotto. One of them was an 8th-degree divine king, one of the divine generals of the Xuanji Grotto. Back then, when Ji Tianxing first came to the Xuanji Grotto, the divine general was one of the people who had injured him besides the heartless divine king. However, now that Ji Tianxing saw him again, he did not have the intention to take revenge. He controlled the primordial chaos bell and took advantage of the time when the 2 of them were conversing to approach silently. "Sir Divine General, we are the domain lords of the moon-slaying, fallen maple, region. We have come on the orders of the Xuanji Grotto." The 2 mid-level divine kings bowed respectfully, and introduced themselves to the divine general guarding the entrance, as well as the purpose of their visit. The divine general's dignified expression immediately softened. He nodded slightly and said, "Please show me your identity tokens and the orders issued by the general." After he finished speaking, he saw that the 2 middle-level god kings were stunned for a moment before he explained, "Please cooperate with me, domain lords. The situation has been tense recently. I am just doing my job for the safety of the Xuanji Grotto. I hope you can understand. Although the Xuanji Grotto maintained its usual confidence, even when the myriad Demon Alliance's army was about to arrive, the Xuanji Grotto did not close. However, the number of soldiers guarding the grotto's entrance had obviously increased by several times compared to before. Those who entered and exited the grotto had to undergo strict inspection and interrogation. This was to prevent the myriad Demon Alliance from sneaking into the Xuanji Grotto during the chaos. The two domain lords understood this point and quickly nodded. "Don't worry, Sir Divine General. Of course we understand and cooperate." As they spoke, the two domain lords quickly took out their identity tokens and the special jade slips that the Xuanji Grotto used to issue orders and handed them to the Divine General guarding the entrance for inspection. The Divine General guarding the entrance and the upper-level God King did not dare to be careless. They really took the tokens and jade slips and carefully checked and compared them. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing steered the primordial chaos bell and silently flew behind one of the domain lords, sticking it to his beast skin cloak. In any case, the two domain lords looked tired and travel-worn. Their cloaks and robes were already covered in dust. Even if there was a speck of black dust, no one would notice. Moreover, this speck of black dust was invisible. It did not have any energy waves. After a while, the Divine General guarding the entrance confirmed the identities of the two domain lords. Only then did he return the tokens and jade slips to them. He reminded them, "Domain lords, your identities have been verified. You may enter the Xuanji Grotto and report to the Grand Marshal. Please remember, after entering the Xuanji Grotto, do not wander around. There will be people inside to receive you and bring you to the Grand Marshal or Commander Qin." The two domain lords came from remote areas. This was the second time in their lives that they had come to the Xuanji Grotto. Naturally, they were very cautious. The two did not dare to be careless about the Divine General's warning. After listening carefully, they nodded and made a statement. Next, the Divine General waved his hand and cast a spell to open the entrance to the grotto. Whoosh! A door opened in the white vortex that led to the Xuanji Grotto. The two domain masters tidied up their clothes and appearances before flying into the white light vortex at a moderate pace. Whoosh! The blinding white light swallowed the two figures. In the next moment, the two domain lords entered the Xuanji Grotto and appeared on an ancient divine rock that was tens of thousands of feet wide. This divine rock was like a millstone. Its surface was flat and filled with mysterious runes. Around the rock were hundreds of godly lords guarding it. There were also 12 godly kings in a formation, ready to deal with any unexpected situations. Seeing this scene, the two domain leaders felt even more reverence and acted even more cautiously. Chapter 3769. The Divine General did not lie to the two domain lords. There were indeed a few envoys waiting around the rock. One of the envoys came forward and asked about the two domain lords' identities before bringing them to meet the War Dragon King. During this process, the primordial chaos bell controlled by Ji Tianxing stuck to one of the realm master's cloaks in the form of transparent dust. There were hundreds of godly lords and 12 godly kings guarding the rock. The 12 godly kings were all upper godly kings, therefore, he did not dare to act rashly to avoid exposing himself. When the two domain lords left the divine stone disk under the guidance of the emissary, he was still observing the situation around the divine stone. Seeing the countless invisible divine formations and the traps around the rock, he frowned, his eyes flashing coldly. Cake. The War Dragon King and Qin, you are truly despicable. They actually buried so many traps and formations around the entrant. Once I lead the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers and break through the entrance to the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. When we step into the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, we will fall into layers of traps and divine formations. At that time, only the upper godly kings will be able to survive. Most of the soldiers will be killed. No wonder the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, and the War Dragon King and Qin you were severely injured. Unfortunately, I will have to disappoint you this time. How can I lead the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers into the Xuanji Grotto Heaven? Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had already planned and prepared. If it were anyone else, the 10,000 demon alliance would definitely be in dire straits. At this thought, Ji Tianxing felt both fear and relief. The Xuanji Grotto Heaven was huge. In Ji Tianxing's impression, it was the largest and most resource-rich grotto heaven on the Starsource continent. The entire grotto heaven was more than 3 million miles wide and could accommodate billions of living beings. It was a small world. In this grotto heaven, there were green mountains and clear waters, icy lakes and snowy plains, as well as deserts and mountains. The divine power of heaven and earth was extremely rich. With a sweep of his divine sense, he could find the resources he needed for cultivation. Occasionally, he would even come across rare treasures of heaven and earth. Ji Tianxing knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor had taken over the mystical paradise because of its size and abundance of resources. At the same time, the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor had also modified and nurtured the Xuanji Grotto over the past 20,000 years. Most of the cultivation resources he had plundered from all over the continent were scattered in the Enigma Grotto. As a result, many resources could be regenerated and multiplied, making the mysterious grotto's resources even more abundant. Just like how Ji Tianxing cultivated the Five Elements world, he would invest hundreds of billions of cultivation resources every once in a while to transform the Five Elements world. Over time, those incomparably precious cultivation resources caused the spirit qi of the Five Elements world to be extremely abundant. Then, even more resources were born, and it became a paradise for cultivators. Swoosh! Swish! The two region masters followed the emissary and flew high up in the sky for an hour before they arrived at the Golden Dragon Mountain in the middle of the grotto heaven. The 100,000-mile-long Golden Dragon Mountain was pieced together by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor after moving thousands of mountain peaks. It was a man-made divine range of heaven and earth that gathered the divine power of the entire mysterious grotto. It was a first-class cultivation paradise. The Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's cave abode and divine palace were built on the Golden Dragon Mountain. At this moment, the hundreds of palaces and mansions in the Golden Dragon Mountain were filled with people. Some of them were the natives of the mysterious grotto, while others were the famous Golden Dragon Guards. Most of them were the region masters and god kings from all over the continent, as well as the soldiers they led. The Golden Dragon Mountain was now a gathering of true expert. The two region masters were about to meet the War Dragon King. Ji Tianxing was worried that the other party would notice something was amiss, so he alighted in advance. When they arrived at the Golden Dragon Mountain, he stealthily left the region master's cape with the primordial chaos bell. Hence, the two region masters followed the emissary to meet the War Dragon King. Ji Tianxing steered the primordial chaos bell and stealthily entered the Golden Dragon Mountain. He roamed around and gathered information. The Golden Dragon Mountain was too big. It spanned 100,000 miles. Fortunately, the palaces and mansions were not scattered throughout the entire mountain range. Instead, they were concentrated at the highest point of the mountain range. Even so, the 800-plus palaces and residences that were scattered all over the place still occupied an area of 20,000 miles in circumference. This was a good thing for Ji Tianxing. At least it would be easier for him to gather information. Originally, he only needed to release his divine consciousness to cover an area of 20,000 miles and see everything clearly. However, there were tens of thousands of godly lords and hundreds of god kings gathered in this area. If he released his divine consciousness openly, he would quickly expose his whereabouts and alert the other party. More importantly, he was still uncertain about one thing. It was extremely important and could even affect the outcome of the war. That was the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor in the mysterious grotto? The Myriad Demon Alliance had been investigating this matter and confirmed that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not there. Ji Tianxing also knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's true body would not return so quickly. However, if he did not investigate this matter personally, he would not be at ease. Therefore, Ji Tianxing used the primordial chaos bell as a cover to investigate the palaces and mansions. At the same time, he was also searching for the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's aura. In other words, he was searching for the aura of a peak god king. As long as there was no peak god king in the mysterious grotto, he was confident that he could destroy it. However, if there was a peak god king in the mysterious grotto, Regardless of whether the other party was the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor or not, his confidence would be greatly reduced. There was no sun in the mysterious grotto. Naturally, there was no day and night. 9 divine pearls floated high in the sky. They continuously released divine light and illuminated millions of miles. The palaces and mansions in the Golden Dragon Mountain were always bathed in the glorious divine light. Tens of thousands of godly lords were obediently waiting in the palaces and mansions. They were circulating their energy and conserving their energy as they waited for orders. Close to 200 God King experts were also meditating and adjusting their breathing quietly. They were guarding their respective officers and soldiers, carrying out their respective orders. Although tens of thousands of experts were gathered in the Golden Dragon Mountain, it was extremely quiet and not noisy at all. Only the Golden Dragon Guards were constantly patrolling and monitoring the surroundings for abnormalities. In such a tense and gloomy atmosphere, Ji Tianxing was like a formless spirit. He wandered around the palaces and mansions without restraint. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. No one discovered anything unusual or his presence. At the same time, he secretly searched over 800 palaces and mansions. He had a clear understanding of the trump cards of the mysterious grotto. There were 23,460 God Monarchs and 212 God King experts gathered here. However, there was no peak God King aura or Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. The general of the mysterious grotto was the severely injured and weak War Dragon King. Next was the governor of the Golden Dragon Guards, Qin Yu. This result made Ji Tianxing feel at ease. After pondering for a long time, he decided to take action. Today, the battle would begin. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3770. Although Ji Tianxing controlled the primordial chaos bell and hid in the headquarters of Xuanji Grotto Heaven, there were palaces and residences all around. Within a radius of 20,000 miles, there were over 20,000 Sir Gods and over 200 God Kings gathered. If he directly summoned over 10,000 soldiers to attack the palaces and residences, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. The soldiers under the command of Xuanji Grotto Heaven would definitely be scared out of their wits and be dumbfounded. But that was all. Other than scaring the enemy, it might not cause any substantial damage, let alone establish the foundation for victory. After all, the 20,000 over Sir Gods and God Kings gathered here were all well rested and unharmed. Even if they were shocked for a moment, they would panic. But under the command of many God Kings, they would be able to react in an instant. Then, they would surround the 1,000 Demon Alliance's soldiers and gradually force their way in, killing all the 1,000 Demon Alliance's soldiers. So what Ji Tianxing wanted to do was to plunge the headquarters of Xuanji Grotto Heaven into chaos. He also wanted to create huge casualties and panic for these Sir Gods and God Kings who were in full condition and had normal combat strength. It would be best if he could execute a decapitation operation and kill a few leaders and such figures. That would be even better. After thinking of a plan, Ji Tianxing started to look for targets. Ji Tianxing's first target was called Qingfeng Courtyard. This courtyard occupied an area of 10,000 feet and was built on the ridge of the Golden Dragon Mountain. Compared to the other residences and palaces, the terrain here was lower and was at the edge. Very obviously, this courtyard was not too important. The people who lived here in the past were just soldiers of the Golden Dragon Guards. Currently, there were over 100 Sir Gods and 1 God King powerhouse living in the courtyard. These people came from a region in the south of the Star Source continent. The 4th degree realm God King was the deputy region master. Very obviously, the region master of this region was more cunning. He did not want to offend Xuanji Grotto Heaven, so he could only send people to help. But he said that he had something important to do and could not leave, so he sent the deputy region master to bring over 100 Sir Gods to help. This bit of help was not enough to get the attention of Xuanji Grotto Heaven. Therefore, after these people entered the Xuanji Grotto, they were placed in the outermost courtyard. These people had already been recuperating here for half a month. During this time, they did nothing but meditate in their rooms all day long. They were just waiting for the day when the Grand Marshal's order was passed down. Then, everyone would go into battle. In this half a month, Other than the first day when an envoy led them here and settled them in the cool breeze courtyard, no one else came. The deputy region master and the hundreds of Sir Gods felt like they had been abandoned and ignored. They were very angry. If it were not for the deputy region master's strong efforts to suppress and persuade them, the hundreds of Sir Gods would have become deserters. Of course, this was just a thought. Now that they had entered the Enigma Grotto, they had no choice but to leave. They couldn't even run away. At that moment, more than 100 Sir Gods were still meditating in various rooms. The deputy region master was in a secret chamber deep underground, cultivating peacefully. Inside the gloomy secret room, there was a faint divine light that was filled with a dense divine aura. Suddenly, a slight spatial fluctuation came from the corner of the secret room. Under normal circumstances, the deputy region master might have sensed it. But at that moment, he was cultivating and in the Enigma Grotto, so he was very relaxed and did not have any vigilance. Therefore, he did not notice the unusual spatial fluctuation, nor did he know that there was an extra person in the secret room. Without a sound, a handsome figure appeared from a dark corner and floated behind the deputy region master. This young man from the dragon clan in a white robe had a handsome face and sharp eyebrows. His eyes were as vast as the sea of stars. Even if he did not show any divine aura, he gave people a sense of unfathomable majesty and dominance. The 5 senses and 6 senses of a divine king were far superior to that of an ordinary divine spirit. The deputy region master finally became alert and realized that something was wrong. He forced himself to stop cultivating and was about to shout. However, a broad and powerful palm suddenly covered his head. A silent but powerful force passed through the top of his head and blasted into his mind. Kaboom! In the deputy region master's mind, there was a thunderous explosion. His consciousness instantly fell into darkness and he lost consciousness. Although he was still sitting cross-legged in the middle of the secret room, he did not look any different, not even a scar. But in fact, his mind had been destroyed, and his godhead was shattered. He was already dead. The young man in the white robe killed the deputy region master in seconds. His figure became transparent, blurred, and soon disappeared. A moment later, he left the breeze yard and sneaked into another house nearby. From beginning to end, there was no unusual sound or aura in the breeze yard. Naturally, no one noticed anything unusual. Next to the breeze yard, there was another house of similar size called. The name was not important. Anyway, there was a divine king and more than 70 divine emperors living in this house. They were also a group of marginal people. Although they were not the region masters of a region, they were the elites of a first-class force in the south. In the area they were in, they were lofty and honorable figures. Wherever they went, they would be surrounded by attendants, and they were extremely honorable. But unfortunately, after coming to the Xuanji Cave Heaven, they could only sit on the bench. In the past 20 days, they had seen too many experts and superiors and deeply felt their insignificance. Therefore, these people were full of energy. In the upcoming war, they wanted to kill the enemy courageously, make contributions, and win the favor of the Xuanji Cave Heaven. However, it was a pity that Ji Tianxing had shown the leader of the sect master what it meant by dying before achieving victory in battle. The sect master was in the secret room thinking about how to stand out in the war and let the Grand Marshal know him. Suddenly, a white figure appeared out of thin air in the study room. The sect master just realized that something was wrong. He was instantly alert and turned his head to look behind him. Unfortunately, he only saw a pair of calm, cold, and deep eyes and a jade-like hand. Then he lost consciousness and fell into a deep sleep forever. Even at the moment of his death, the sect master still didn't know who had killed him. He was even more confused as to who would dare to assassinate him in the Xuanji Wonderland. It did not make sense. He was just an insignificant person. He would not compete with anyone for credit, nor would he block anyone's path to promotion and wealth. How could he be so underhanded? With so many questions and puzzlement, the sect master passed away. The dozens of divine emperors under his command were still in various rooms in the house, actively preparing for war, cultivating, and working hard. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3771. For an entire day, 24 hours, Ji Tianxing was busy. His invisible figure traveled through the Golden Dragon mountain range, quietly entering and exiting the various residences and palaces. Although the hundreds of palaces and residences were filled with people. But inside the majority of the houses, there were only Divine Lord realm experts and no Divine King realm powerhouses. Therefore, Ji Tianxing ignored the residences and palaces that only had Divine Lords and specifically targeted the residences with Divine Kings. He was only one person. If he wanted to greatly weaken the mystical grotto's combat power in the shortest amount of time, this was the only way. Assassinate as many Divine Kings as possible. Not only would this reduce the number of Divine Kings, it would also cause many Divine Lords to temporarily lose their commander and leader. After all, these Divine Lords came from all over the world. They came from various domains of the Starsource continent and belonged to different factions. Even if they were nominally subordinates of the mystical grotto, they would not directly listen to the orders of the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu. They needed their leader to relay the orders. Ji Tianxing assassinated their leader. For a short period of time, no one would notice anything amiss. Once the battle began and the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu gave the order to attack, they would discover that the order could not be transmitted smoothly. At that time, the 20,000 Divine Lords in the sky of the mystical grotto would fall into chaos. The result could be imagined. Within a day, Ji Tianxing assassinated more than 80 Divine Kings. Among these Divine Kings, most were Middle Divine Kings. Only a few were Lower Divine Kings and Upper Divine Kings. These Divine Kings were not from the mystical grotto's headquarters. They were basically the domain lords of various domains, the elites of various peak factions. The number of Divine Lord experts they led was more than 15,000. In addition, it was worth mentioning that these 80 Divine Kings were not very strong, but Ji Tianxing did not mind. Every time he killed a Divine King, he would plunder their divine spark fragments and interspatial rings. In this way, after a busy day, his harvest was terrifying. Of course, now was not the time to count the spoils of war. This had to be left for later. Currently, there were already a dozen Divine Lords in their residences who realized that they had lost contact with their leaders. Some of the more impatient Divine Lords violently broke open the doors to secret rooms and study rooms. Then, they discovered that their leader had died in a very strange and bizarre manner. He had died silently. Instantly, those Sir Gods fell into a great panic and were out of their wits. Many people were guessing who had killed their leader. Most importantly, this was the headquarters of the Enigma Grotto, a place where experts gathered. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the safest place on the Starsource continent. Who was it that quietly killed their leader? For a time, countless Divine Lords were in a state of panic. Everyone had different opinions. Some of the more imaginative ones even guessed that an expert from the Xuanji Grotto had killed their commander. As for the reason, he didn't know. There was no reason. In any case, this was the mysterious paradise. Other than experts like the Battle Dragon King, Qin Yu, and the Divine General guarding the entrance, who could assassinate the other Divine Kings silently. Thankfully, there were many Divine Lords who were able to maintain their rationality. Realizing that the situation was not good, they quickly went to find the emissaries and reported the news to them, hoping that the experts of the Xuanji Grotto would be able to investigate the matter. Even if the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu's statuses were too high, they would not be alarmed by this matter. Sending a few Golden Dragon Guard commanders to deal with this matter was only natural. After all, the news had already spread. Not only did the Sir Gods in the palaces and mansions fall into panic and chaos. The news spread in all directions and quickly alerted even more mansions and palaces. As a result, in a short 4 hours, 50 to 60 forces discovered that their leader had been assassinated. Without a doubt, the matter had completely blown up and exploded. Dozens of palaces and mansions fell into chaos. The Sir Gods were restless and discussed in panic. The news could not be covered up and quickly spread throughout the entire Golden Dragon mountain range. Even the unscathed God Kings were frightened out of their wits. They were filled with fear and unease. In such a situation, many experts and Sir Gods were suspicious and wary of each other. Who would have the mind to prepare for war? Of course, now that the matter had been exposed, everyone became vigilant and uneasy. Ji Tianxing naturally could not make a move. He temporarily hid in the primal chaos primordial bell and monitored the highest palace on the mountain peak. The Battle Dragon King, Qin Yu, and the generals of the mysterious grotto were frequently entering and exiting the palace. Obviously, the Battle Dragon King, Qin Yu, and the others had also received the news. As long as one was not a fool, they would understand how serious this matter was. Soon, Qin Yu personally led 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders and hurried to the palace where the incident happened. Seeing Qin Yu appear, Ji Tianxing's eyes suddenly lit up and became interested. Hehe, this guy fell into the void back then and was still alive. He is considered lucky. Now that his injuries have not healed, his strength is still very weak. If I can kill this guy before the war, it will save me a lot of trouble. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing controlled the primal chaos primordial bell and quietly followed behind Qin Yu and the others. After a while, Qin Yu and the 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders arrived at the palace where the incident happened. The 3 experts looked around and saw dozens of palaces around them. They were all in a hubbub of voices and were in a state of panic. There were even thousands of divine lords who demanded an explanation from the Xuanji Grotto Heaven out of anger. If they could not come up with a reasonable explanation, they would not be able to accept the bizarre death of their leader, let alone fight for the mysterious grotto. At this moment, who those divine lord experts were loyal to was clear as day. Seeing the crowd clamoring incessantly, the Golden Dragon Guards who rushed over after hearing the news suppressed those divine lords with their foreheads covered in sweat. Qin Yu was so angry that his face was livid, his entire body trembling in anger. He really wanted to throw a tantrum, destroy the heaven and earth, and then ask loudly, who the fuck did this? But very unfortunately, as the deputy commander of the mysterious grotto, he absolutely could not do so. He could only be patient, suppress his anger, and carefully examine the scene of the crime, looking for clues. Qin Yu was indeed worthy of being a peak 8th level Divine King expert. His vision was like a torch, and he was rich in experience. He only used 100 breaths of time to finish investigating a palace and gave a conclusion. To be able to assassinate a middle-level Divine King silently without alerting anyone, without leaving any clues, and without any wounds, this is definitely done by an 8th level or 9th level Divine King expert. The 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders nodded repeatedly to express their agreement. But the courtyard full of Divine Lord experts had cold and indifferent expressions. There were even some extremely daring and angry true lovers who even shouted at the top of their lungs. Do we still need you to investigate? We already guessed it long ago. Isn't this obvious? Chapter 3772. Qin Yu almost exploded in anger. As the Honorable Golden Dragon Guard governor, he was actually ridiculed by a mere divine lord in public. How infuriating was this? If it was a normal day, he would have slapped that person into pieces. But at this moment, he couldn't do that. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, he had to endure. He took a deep breath and pretended that he didn't hear that sentence. He said to the 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders, "There are too many places where the incident happened. Let's split up and check the scene as soon as possible." The 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders obeyed and hurriedly left to check the other palaces and houses. Although Qin Yu knew that this matter was very strange and made him and Battle Dragon King extremely shocked. Even if he investigated carefully, he wouldn't be able to find any results. But he had to do it in front of the 10,000 divine lords. At that time, he still had to discuss countermeasures with Battle Dragon King and think of a way to end this matter. He had to appease these 10,000 divine lords. Otherwise, the future war would be worrying. Swish. Qin Yu frowned with a gloomy face. While thinking about this matter, he flew to another palace. The courtyard was filled with divine monarch experts. Looking at Qin Yu's departing figure, they all revealed dissatisfied expressions and eyes. But due to Qin Yu's prestige, no one said anything. No one dared to follow him and ask. This made things convenient for Ji Tianxing. He quietly followed Qin Yu. When Qin Yu flew to the space between the 2 palaces, above a lush forest, he finally made his move. Swish. Suddenly, without any warning, a black shadow descended from the originally calm sky. Qin Yu was still thinking about something and was frowning in distress. He wasn't on guard at all. He was flying in the sky. Why did everything turn black and fall into a dark world? Who? Which bastard? Qin Yu subconsciously took out his divine saber. As he cursed, he slashed at the dark walls around him. However, when the dazzling saber light slashed at those dark barriers, there was a muffled bang 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 sound, but there was no effect. He suddenly understood something and turned pale with fright, his eyes glaring angrily. I understand now. It's you bastard who assassinated so many divine kings. Qin Yu, who was in the dark space with a radius of 10,000 li, roared with murderous intent. However, even after searching the entire dark space, he still couldn't find the culprit. Only a low male voice came from above his head. You're not that stupid. You finally understand. This voice was somewhat unfamiliar. Qin Yu frowned as he pondered, whose voice was this? Unfortunately, he didn't know the answer, so he shouted coldly, Who are you? Why did he betray the Xuanji Grotto? Do you know what kind of sin this is? I will definitely report this to His Majesty Dragon Emperor. No matter who you are or what your background is, you will suffer His Majesty Dragon Emperor's wrath. In the darkness, the voice sounded again, and the tone was rather mocking. Ha ha! Don't use the Dragon Emperor to scare me. He's not in the Xuanji Grotto. Moreover, you're about to die and you don't know my identity. Who can report to the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor? You. Qin Yu's anger surged wildly, his killing intent overflowing to the heavens. Through these few sentences, he was even more certain that this person was from the Xuanji Utopia. However, he really couldn't figure out who this person was. Who had such strength, reason, and motive to betray the Xuanji Utopia like this? Thinking of this, Qin Yu decided to continue probing. He said coldly, Bastard, even if you hide, I won't be able to see through your identity. However, you've attacked here, and there are restless divine lords nearby, as well as my golden dragon guards. Now, they must have noticed something amiss and will quickly report to the Grand Marshal. The voice sounded again in the darkness, and it said with a sneer, Since I've attacked, how can I expose myself so easily? There's such a huge dark world inside this divine artifact. However, in reality, the divine artifact has shrunk to the size of a speck of dust and is hiding in the ground. Those divine lords and golden dragon guards only know that you suddenly disappeared, but they don't know what happened. By the time the War Dragon King finds out about this, your ashes will already be cold. Hearing these words, Qin Yu was naturally filled with anger. However, after confirming that the traitor wasn't the War Dragon King, he heaved a sigh of relief. He still wanted to say something, but the voice didn't speak again. Then, an invisible divine aura descended from all directions, and a majestic power that could suppress heaven and earth crushed Qin Yu. Even though Qin Yu was prepared and powerful, he was still injured by the terrifying pressure, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. His divine power instantly became chaotic, and his combat power dropped drastically. His movements were also greatly restricted. Even though he was in danger, he didn't panic. He hurriedly used his energy to resist the divine aura, and he held his saber vigilantly, in case the other party suddenly attacked. However, Qin Yu still underestimated the other party's strength and methods. Whoosh! In the darkness, a dazzling golden sword light suddenly appeared, and it carried the sword essence of the heavenly sword and attacked. Feeling the familiar sword essence and divine power aura, Qin Yu's expression changed drastically, and his eyes widened like copper bells. It's you. How is it possible, Long Tian? How can it be you? Without a doubt, Qin Yu recognized the true identity of the traitor. It was Long Tian. However, he couldn't believe it, and he couldn't accept this result. Didn't Long Tian lead the Myriad Demon Alliance's army and approach Xuanji Grotto Heaven? How could he sneak into Xuanji Grotto Heaven and assassinate so many divine kings? Damn bastard, how did he do it? At this moment, many thoughts flashed through Qin Yu's mind. However, he didn't care about the truth and could only wave his saber with all his might to block that dazzling sword light. Kaboom! In the next instant, the sacred golden sword light struck Qin Yu, shattering the saber light he used, and sent him flying. PFFF, while he was still in midair, Qin Yu was already vomiting blood wildly, and his internal organs were shattered. Even if he was at his peak, He was not Ji Tianxing's match, let alone now that his old injuries had not healed. Before he could land on the ground, thousands of dazzling sword auras suddenly attacked him from all directions in the darkness. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Thousands of sword lights crisscrossed, as fast as lightning, like a sword net, and also like a hurricane. Qin Yu was in the middle, resisting with incomparable difficulty. Very soon, he was minced until his flesh was dripping with blood, and he was riddled with wounds. If it was a great battle in the outside world, he would definitely be able to execute all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills, and utilize all kinds of divine Dao laws. This battle would also definitely startle heaven and earth, destroying the commotion within a radius of 100,000 miles. However, very unfortunately, he fell into a trap from the start and lost the initiative. Being suppressed inside the Chaos Primordial Bell, even if he had tremendous ability and methods, he could not unleash 30% of it. His defeat was already destined. End of this chapter. Chapter 3773. Ji Tianxing and Qin Yu fought inside the Primordial Chaos Bell for half an hour. In the end, Qin Yu ended up dead and his Dao dissipated. His body was destroyed, turned to ashes. Only over 20 divine persona fragments, an interspatial ring, and several divine artifacts were left. Among them was a high-grade king-class divine saber, a damaged high-grade king-class divine armor, as well as a high-grade king-class divine warship. And Ji Tianxing paid an extremely small price, only expending a lot of divine power, not even injured at all. The specific process did not need to be described in detail. Anyway, only Ji Tianxing and Qin Yu two people knew. Except, Qin Yu's heart was still filled with anger and unwillingness until the moment he died. He hated himself for being careless, actually not expecting Long Tian to be so audacious, actually daring to infiltrate Xuanji Grotto Heaven. And what made him feel unreconciled was that even though he was killed, he could not spread the news. This way, his death was worthless. Battle Dragon King and Xuanji Grotto Heaven's powerhouses still did not guard against Long Tian's existence and might be assassinated by Long Tian. But Qin Yu had no other choice. He could only carry endless regret and unwillingness and fall into silence forever. Swoosh. After Ji Tianxing put away the spoils of war, he quickly put away the primordial chaos bell and appeared in the dense forest. Although he used the primordial chaos bell to conceal his aura, killing Qin Yu inside the god bell should not attract attention. But the current Golden Dragon mountain range had already fallen into chaos. Countless divine king powerhouses were alarmed and were currently scouting and searching everywhere. Therefore, he could only end the battle quickly to avoid being discovered. After putting away the god bell, Ji Tianxing concealed himself in the dense forest, silently observing the nearby situation. At the same time, he was still considering in his mind, who should he assassinate next? Should he continue to assassinate those divine kings in the chaos, or kill Battle Dragon King in one spurt of energy? Now that Qin Yu was dead, the commander-in-chief overseeing Xuanji Grotto Heaven was only left with Battle Dragon King. Furthermore, Battle Dragon King was seriously injured and had not recovered until now. It was the best time to kill him. Once Battle Dragon King was killed too, Xuanji Grotto Heaven would truly be a group of dragons without a leader. This battle was going to be an easy victory for them. However, at this moment, a deep and dignified voice came from above Ji Tianxing's head. No wonder you can cause such a big mess. So it's because of you, you bastard. The deep voice of the middle-aged man was filled with anger and killing intent. Even though the palaces and residences in the surroundings were in a state of chaos, a boiling cauldron of voices, it was extremely noisy. However, the voice that was filled with killing intent still entered Ji Tianxing's ears very clearly. What followed was a biting cold murderous intent that locked onto him. Ji Tianxing subconsciously raised his head and saw 4 God King experts standing in the air above the forest. 2 of them were wearing golden armor and golden dragon cloaks. They were obviously the commanders of the Golden Dragon Guards. And the 2 leading God Kings, Ji Tianxing actually recognized them. The one who spoke was the Battle Dragon King, clad in the purple dragon divine armor and a crown on his head. And beside the Battle Dragon King was a burly middle-aged man in a blood-red long robe. He was the Cheongqi tribe's patriarch, Xue Shong. I've been discovered. This was the first thought that flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. Originally, he was very careful in his actions. He wanted to assassinate Qin Yu before dealing with the Battle Dragon King. He did not expect the Battle Dragon King to detect his presence and even brought Xueshong along. Even though this was somewhat out of Ji Tianxing's expectations, it also exposed his whereabouts on the spot and prevented him from assassinating other god kings. But he was not worried or surprised. After all, this was the headquarters of Xuanji Grotto Heaven, and the Battle Dragon King was a 9th-degree God King expert. How could he not have some tricks and abilities? Since his whereabouts were exposed, there was no need to assassinate anymore. He would just fight openly. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing transmitted his voice to Hu Xinyu and the left and right protectors. He instructed, "Everyone, be mentally prepared. When I give the order later, all of you must kill your way out." Hu Xinyu and Ao Jinying immediately replied, "Young master, we are always prepared. Are you finally going to give the order to attack?" Ji Tianxing then remembered that when he first entered Xuanji Grotto Heaven, he had asked everyone to prepare for battle. But later on, he changed his mind and used a day to assassinate many god kings. This caused the soldiers to be on edge all this time. Thinking that the upcoming battle situation was somewhat special, he warned the soldiers, "Everyone, don't let your guard down. The situation this time is different. I am in Xuanji Grotto Heaven, at their headquarters. Previously, I used a day to assassinate more than 80 god kings and created chaos for them. Now that their headquarters is in chaos, it is the best time to attack. I will deal with their commander. You just need to kill the enemy as soon as possible. After all, the enemy still has 130 god kings and more than 20,000 monarchs." When Ji Tianxing's voice rang out in the divine clock world, the tens of thousands of soldiers were stunned and dumbfounded. In the next moment, countless people regained their senses and erupted into earth-shattering cries and discussions. "This is unbelievable. The young master actually sneaked into Xuanji Grotto Heaven. Oh my god. The acting leader is too brave and too quick-witted. The acting leader's courage and wisdom are truly admirable, as expected of the successor appointed by the old leader. Under the leadership of the acting leader, we will definitely dominate the Star Source continent. Sneaking into Xuanji Grotto Heaven alone is like entering a tiger's den, using his own strength to assassinate so many god kings. This is an unparalleled divine ability. Such an acting leader is simply our unparalleled hero. The acting leader used his own strength to kill almost half of the enemy generals. What are we afraid of? Brothers, let's buck up. Let's use all of our strength and methods to finish the final battle. This time, we must still win beautifully. We must not embarrass the acting leader." In the divine clock world, tens of thousands of soldiers were shouting. Everyone's blood was boiling and their morale was soaring. At the same time, the Battle Dragon King and Bloody War stared at Ji Tianxing and summoned many God King powerhouses to hurry over and surround Ji Tianxing. Even though the Battle Dragon King and Bloody War were currently the strongest people in Xuanji Grotto Heaven. But the two of them were defeated by Ji Tianxing. Facing Ji Tianxing, they did not have the confidence to win at all. Following the Battle Dragon King's order, large batches of God King powerhouses flew out from the palaces in all directions very quickly. Among them were the various regions' domain lords, Golden Dragon Guards captains and commanders, as well as Xuanji Grotto Heaven's consecrators. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was about to be surrounded by dozens of God Kings, the Battle Dragon King's heart finally calmed down a lot. Bloody War, whose expression had been ugly all along, finally recovered to normal. His brows were filled with confidence. Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianxing naturally knew what he was thinking. He could not help sneering and said, "Bloody War, do you think that you can sit back and relax after hugging Xuanji Grotto Heaven's thighs? Don't forget, you swore a heavenly Tao oath previously. If you dare to make a move against this king, you'll definitely be reduced to ashes." Chapter 3774. The fact that Xueshong had been forced by Ji Tianxing to swear a heavenly oath had always been his humiliation. And now, Ji Tianxing had mercilessly exposed it in front of the War Dragon King, the two Golden Dragon Guard commanders, and many other godly kings. This enraged Xueshong. His eyes blazed with fury as killing intent surged from his body. In particular, the War Dragon King and the Golden Dragon Guard commanders were stunned as they looked at him strangely. This made him even more ashamed and furious. He wanted nothing more than to cut Ji Tianqing into pieces and grind his bones to dust. The War Dragon King frowned as he stared at Shui Shong unhappily. He asked in a low voice, "Shui Shong, is this true?" The Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. A 9th-degree godly king was a top expert and could be of great use. Therefore, the War Dragon King had gladly accepted Shui Shong's request to join the Xuanji Grotto Heaven and entrusted him with an important task. At this critical juncture, he needed an expert like Shui Shong who had a king-level supreme-grade divine artifact to resist the myriad demon alliance's attack. But if it was as Ji Tianqing had said, and Shui Shong had sworn a heavenly oath to never attack Ji Tianqing, then it was a different story. At least, Shui Shong's usefulness would be greatly reduced. This disappointed and angered the War Dragon King. Shui Shong naturally understood the twists and turns in the story. He hurriedly bowed and apologized to the War Dragon King. He explained softly, "Grand Marshal, please calm down. This matter was also caused by the Daotai tribe's leader, Dao Yongsheng." He gave the Battle Dragon King a simple account of what had happened, downplaying his humiliation and scheming. As for his helplessness and Ji Tianqing's treachery, he had to emphasize it. While the two of them were whispering, Ji Tianqing's expression did not change as he observed the godly kings gathered around. But in reality, he secretly released the primordial chaos bell and controlled it with his mind to fly to the other side of the Golden Dragon mountain range. Whoosh! The primordial chaos bell turned into a speck of dust and remained invisible. It also concealed its aura so that no one could detect it. Under the control of Ji Tianqing's mind, the divine bell flew to the other end of the Golden Dragon mountain range and hid outside a house. That area was 10,000 miles away from here, far away from the Battle Dragon King, Shui Shong, and the dozens of God King experts. Moreover, the dozens of palaces and mansions in that area were in a state of chaos without a leader. The thousands of divine emperors gathered there were at a loss, full of suspicion, anxiety, and worry. They were like a tray of loose sand. At this time, Ji Tianqing secretly controlled the God Clock to open 6 spatial channels. At the same time, he also gave the order to the tens of thousands of soldiers in the divine clock world to attack. Swish! Swish! From the 6 dazzling space swirls, thousands of soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance flooded out. Regardless of whether it was the leading God King powerhouses or the God Lord powerhouses charging bravely, all of them were agitated and excited. They were in a state where their combat strength was off the charts. Kill. Charge. Flatten the Xuanji Grotto and kill all the enemies. The 10,000 Demon Alliance is invincible. The Xuanji Grotto must die. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance all rushed out of the divine clock world. They divided into dozens of teams and charged toward the mansions and palaces nearby. They were excited and their blood was boiling. They shouted inspiring slogans and emitted terrifying killing intent and fighting spirit. The divine emperors in the palaces and mansions were in a state of depression, confusion, and helplessness. Many of them were dumbfounded. Seeing the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance suddenly descending from the sky like heavenly soldiers and generals, everyone was dumbfounded. They were scared out of their wits and dumbfounded. Immediately after, a shocking and devastating massacre began. Swish! 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 The soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance rushed forward without caring about their own safety. They released their divine power at all costs and cast divine skill lights and shadows. All kinds of secret killing moves and divine skills were thrown into the crowd without any regard for their own lives. In an instant, the highest point of the Golden Dragon Mountain, an area with a radius of 10,000 miles, was covered by the 7-colored divine light. Earth-shattering battle cries and deafening explosions continued to spread out, waking everyone up. Destructive shockwaves of divine light spread out in all directions, bringing with them a rain of blood, broken limbs, and fragments of divine weapons. They fiercely hit everything in their path. The splendid palaces, the quaint mansions, and the beautiful mountains and rivers were all turned into ruins and ashes in a flash. In just a dozen breaths, hundreds of palaces and mansions were destroyed by the aftermath of the battle. More than 3,000 divine emperors were killed or severely injured on the spot and lost their ability to fight. However, the divine emperors who were shocked and confused finally realized what was going on. Even without the command of the divine kings, they still had captains and commander-level divine emperors who could order them to resist and fight back. Although many of them fought back and joined forces to resist the attacks of the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, they were too weak. But very sadly, their strength was too low and could not withstand the fierce attacks of divine king powerhouses at all. In addition, they did not have a formation and did not have a unified command. They fought randomly and fought on their own. They could not fight back at all. Naturally, the divine emperors retreated in defeat and suffered heavy casualties. Many people who were afraid of death and had lost their fighting spirit retreated to the mountain peak. They wanted to seek the protection of the Golden Dragon Guards, the Battle Dragon King, and other experts. The soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance did not advance rashly. Under the leadership of the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and others, they fought steadily and steadily. They gradually eliminated the enemies in front of them and pushed forward step by step. On the other side of the Golden Dragon Mountain, Xueshong had already finished explaining to the Battle Dragon King. Although he could not attack Ji Tianxing, he was afraid that he would be punished by the heavens. However, he could deal with anyone other than Ji Tianxing, such as the guardians, elders, and heavenly kings of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Moreover, in order to eliminate the Battle Dragon King's worries, he volunteered to kill the guardians and elders of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Seeing that he was so sensible, the Battle Dragon King felt relieved. It was also at this moment that more than 40 godly king experts rushed over and surrounded Ji Tianxing. At the same time, on the other side of the Golden Dragon Mountain, more than 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers descended from the sky. Their morale was high as they charged forward. Seeing the sudden appearance of the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers, the Battle Dragon King, Xueshong, and dozens of godly kings were shocked. Their faces were filled with shock and fear. The fact that Ji Tianxing could infiltrate the Xuanji Grotto Heaven was already unbelievable. They did not expect that not only did he infiltrate the Xuanji Grotto Heaven and assassinate many godly kings, but he also brought more than 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers with him. This despicable fellow was truly sinister and despicable to the extreme. Seeing the palaces and residences being destroyed and thousands of divine emperors being slaughtered by the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers, the Battle Dragon King and many other godly kings were so angry that their eyes turned red. However, the Battle Dragon King had a strong will and immediately regained his senses. He did not even think about how Ji Tianxing had managed to bring more than 10,000 soldiers into the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. He immediately issued several orders in order to stabilize the situation as soon as possible. Chapter 3775. The War Dragon King had a few orders, but they were clear and went straight to the point. He sent a large number of Golden Dragon Guards to support the Ser Gods and lead the scattered Ser Gods to resist the attack of the Myriad Demon League. At this critical moment, no one had the time to comfort the Ser Gods who were out of their wits. He could only use the noble status and dignity of the Golden Dragon Guards to command those divine emperors and gather them into a powerful force. Of course, Xueshong, who could not attack Ji Tianxing because of the heavenly oath, was also sent by the War Dragon King to deal with the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League. After all, the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League were led by the left and right protectors, a few elders, and the heavenly kings. They were all experts in the 8th and 9th tier of the Divine King realm. The Golden Dragon Guards alone could not deal with them, so Xueshong had to help. Other than these two orders, the War Dragon King also sent a group of Golden Dragon Guards to gather everyone and form a battle formation to fight the enemy. There were hundreds of palaces and mansions that were not attacked or assassinated. There were also more than 80 divine kings and more than 10,000 Ser Gods. They were only awakened by the commotion of the battle and did not know what was going on. The commanders of the Golden Dragon Guards had to hurry over and gather these people to lead them into battle. This was the only way to stabilize the situation and prevent the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto from collapsing. As for the War Dragon King, he could not personally command the 20,000 soldiers to fight the battle, so he temporarily handed over the power to the consecrators and the Golden Dragon Guards. He and the 40 God King experts present were going to stay behind to deal with Ji Tianxing. Although the War Dragon King and the 40 Divine Kings formed such a powerful battle formation just to deal with Ji Tianxing, it seemed like he was making a mountain out of a molehill. However, in the War Dragon King's eyes, it was necessary. Although the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League had appeared unexpectedly, they were not afraid of them. Even if they appeared out of nowhere and caused great casualties to the Xuanji Grotto. However, the advantage of surprise would soon be lost. As long as the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto and the Golden Dragon Guards stood firm and fought back in an orderly manner, the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League would soon be defeated. The one that made the War Dragon King feel uneasy and fearful, and that he had to eliminate as soon as possible, was Ji Tianxing. Firstly, it was because this person's strength was formidable, comparable to a peak divine king. His strength and methods were extremely shocking. If they did not kill this person, he would definitely be able to stir up a storm and slaughter thousands of soldiers by himself, destroying the entire Golden Dragon mountain range. Secondly, this person's methods were ruthless, sinister, and despicable, and it was impossible to guard against. In the past few months, the Enigma Grotto had suffered a great loss in front of this person. They had lost all face. If he did not kill Jiang Chen, there would be changes. Others might not believe it, but the Battle Dragon King was very sure that as long as Ji Tianxing was still alive, he would definitely be able to destroy the Xuanji Grotto and kill everyone there, including him. The Battle Dragon King's hatred, apprehension, and fear of Ji Tianxing had already reached the extreme. In his eyes, Ji Tianxing was even more terrifying than Alliance leader Luo Hu. Ha ha! War Dragon King, you've gathered so many divine kings just to deal with me. You really think highly of me. Ji Tianxing stood in the sky, holding the burial of heaven. He looked at the War Dragon King with a cold smile. The primordial chaos bell that had turned into dust had returned to his hand. Even though the 40 God Kings in the surroundings were the masters of the various regions and the commanders of the Golden Dragon Guards, they were basically middle-level God Kings with high abilities. However, Ji Tianxing was fearless. He did not think much of those intermediate divine kings. The War Dragon King's face was as cold as ice. His gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared at Ji Tianxing. He did not mind Ji Tianxing's mockery and said in a low voice, "Your strength and despicableness are worthy of my full strength. Long Tian, it's because I know how powerful you are that I'm so cautious. Because I'll definitely kill you today to rid the world of evil and enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. You sinister and vicious thief, it was your appearance that caused the entire continent to fall into chaos and war, causing countless lives to be plunged into misery and suffering. Hundreds of millions of people were affected." The War Dragon King gritted his teeth and cursed. He did not hide his hatred and resentment for Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was not angry. He shook his head and smiled coldly. "It's just revenge. Why do you have to use such high-sounding reasons? You're not the heavenly Tao. What right do you have to speak for Tianxing? Also, I can understand your desire to kill me, but you have to face reality. You fell into the void. It's good enough that you managed to survive. You're still heavily injured. With your current condition, even with the help of these divine kings, can you really kill me? Ha ha! You're too naive." The War Dragon King instinctively wanted to retort. However, he suddenly remembered that Xueshong had mentioned something to him before. He frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, realization dawned on him. He stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and shouted, "Bastard! You're so confident because of Dao Yongsheng's primordial chaos bell? Also, did you bring the people of the Myriad Demon Alliance here with the help of the godly clock?" He immediately found the answer to the questions that he had hidden in his heart. The Battle Dragon King's expression became even more gloomy. His previously confident gaze immediately lost its self-confidence. He was very clear about the power of a supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact. It was also because of this that he accepted and put Xueshong in an important position. Originally, Xueshong had Patriarch Qi's indestructible golden body, which was just enough to deal with Long Tian. However, That idiot Shui Shong actually swore a heavenly Tao oath. The War Dragon King's expression turned even uglier when he thought of this. His chest burned with rage. He did not have a supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact. He was no match for Long Tian. However, since things had come to this, the War Dragon King would not back down. He would not show any fear or cowardice. The 40 god kings around him were all looking at him. He could not afford to lose their morale. In the blink of an eye, the War Dragon King regained his confidence. He raised his divine spear and shouted, "So what if you have the primordial chaos bell? Since you've entered the mysterious grotto heaven, you'll die here. Kill." The 40 god kings around him had been waiting for a long time. When they heard the order to kill, all of them roared angrily. They waved their divine weapons and unleashed all of their divine power, attacking Ji Tianxing from all sides. In the next moment, divine skill light shadows that blotted out the sky poured down like a torrential flood, drowning Ji Tianxing. Dozens of formless divine senses also bombarded Ji Tianxing's godhead. Even the space in this area was sealed, making it difficult for Ji Tianxing to move. It was difficult for him to dodge or escape. Of course, the Battle Dragon King didn't stay idle either. He waved his divine spear and unleashed a sky-piercing light that tore through the sky, aiming for Ji Tianxing. He and the 40 god kings attacked together. With such terrifying power, it was almost enough to destroy the mysterious grotto heaven. He was confident that even peak god kings like Luo Hu and the Golden Dragon Emperor would be scared witless in the face of such a terrifying attack. Chapter 3776. Everyone thought that Ji Tianxing was a peak godly king. Actually, he was not. He was just a 7th stage godly king. However, the combat strength he displayed was comparable to a peak godly king. If they really fought, he might not lose to Luo Hu and the Golden Dragon Emperor. However, he was not a true peak godly king after all. His cultivation level had not reached the peak yet. Therefore, he could only avoid the full attack of the Battle Dragon King and the 40 godly kings. Of course, he would not hide in a panic, nor would he be injured by them. If it was in the past, he would use the infinite sky of turbidity to fuse with the heaven and earth to neutralize the attacks. However, it was different this time. The Battle Dragon King had just said that he had the primordial chaos bell and thought that it was his greatest trump card. Since that was the case, Ji Tianxing was not willing to reveal more trump cards. At the same time, he wanted to use this opportunity to test how strong the primordial chaos bell's defense was. After all, he had just finished refining the primordial chaos bell not long ago and had not really tested its power. Swoosh! When the sky full of divine arts descended and drowned Ji Tianxing's figure, he suddenly disappeared. His figure disappeared from the sky, leaving behind only a black dust-like primordial chaos bell. At this moment, the primordial chaos bell was not invisible. It was openly displayed in front of everyone. However, it was too small. The godly kings could only release their divine senses to see its appearance. In the next moment, the overwhelming light of divine spells and all kinds of earth-shattering divine spells bombarded the primordial bell of chaos one after another. Unfortunately, the primordial chaos bell was too small and did not seem to be affected. Most of the divine arts brushed past it and landed on the Golden Dragon Mountain. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! An earth-shattering sound immediately erupted and reverberated through the universe. The terrifying impact caused the entire Golden Dragon Mountain range to shake violently. The Golden Dragon Mountain was formed by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's supreme divine arts and was extremely sturdy. However, the Golden Dragon Mountain was unable to withstand such a terrifying bombardment. Immediately, several cracks appeared on the mountain, revealing several huge abysses. That 10,000-mile-long crack was like an abyss, causing people to feel fear just by looking at it. The terrifying shockwaves of divine power also destroyed half of the palaces and residences in the mountain range. Just like that, the once magnificent palace complex, the sacred and majestic Golden Dragon Divine Palace, was reduced to scorched earth and ruins. As far as the eye could see, the entire mountain range was covered in desolation. Only a few dilapidated palaces and a large pile of dilapidated walls remained. Even if the Xuanji Grotto won the battle and wiped out the myriad Demon League soldiers, they wouldn't be happy about it. It was unknown how many years it would take to recover from such a tragic loss. However, this wasn't what angered the War Dragon King the most. What truly infuriated him and made him almost go berserk on the spot was that the full-powered strike from him and the 40 God Kings actually failed to break through the primordial Chaos Bell's defense. The tiny speck of black dust was still floating in the sky, looking very stable and calm. Naturally, Ji Tianxing, who was hiding in the primordial Chaos Bell, was also unharmed. Damn bastard. That stupid bell actually has such a strong defense. The War Dragon King glared at the primordial Chaos Bell as he roared with bloodshot eyes. The 40 God Kings around him were also filled with shock and disbelief. At this moment, the primordial Chaos Bell suddenly disappeared. Everyone hurriedly released their divine senses and used their ultimate skills to search for its whereabouts. They wanted to see where it had escaped to. However, before they could find its whereabouts, a dazzling divine golden sword appeared behind the God Kings out of thin air. Swish! The divine golden sword, which was hundreds of thousands of feet long, was filled with domineering and violent sword intent. It struck the God Kings with an unstoppable momentum. Even though a few God Kings managed to react in time and cast spells to block or teleport away, the space around them had already been frozen. However, the space within a radius of 5,000 kilometers had been frozen, and they were unable to teleport away. Even if they tried to block it, their speed was too slow. Bam! 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 Crack! Boom! Crack! In the next instant, a series of muffled sounds and explosions rang out. The God Kings were sliced in half or sent flying. Shredded corpses and fresh blood rained down from the sky. The God King's screams were still echoing in the sky, but Ji Tianxing had disappeared again. He turned invisible again and looked for the next opportunity to assassinate. The War Dragon King and the other God Kings' expressions changed. Many of them revealed fearful expressions. The 30-odd God Kings in particular were even more tense as they vigilantly watched their surroundings. Even the War Dragon King's heart was in his mouth as he focused his attention. He was also afraid that Ji Tianxing would attack. After all, he wasn't confident that he could block it. Hence, he focused his divine sense to the maximum and enveloped a radius of 50,000 miles, carefully monitoring for any abnormalities. At the same time, he also used his ultimate skills to search for Ji Tianxing's whereabouts and aura. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing appeared again in just a few short breaths. This time, he still attacked a few mid-level God Kings and didn't attack the War Dragon King. When the dazzling sword light lit up, the God Kings were enveloped by the sword intent and revealed looks of despair. The War Dragon King actually heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he didn't attack me. That was probably the thought that flashed through his mind at that moment. Following a series of muffled bangs, 2 more God Kings were assassinated, their heads separated from their bodies. Fortunately, only their bodies were destroyed and their godheads were damaged. They didn't die on the spot. The 2 God Kings were scared out of their wits and lost all will to fight. Their godheads hurriedly left their bodies and flew into the distance. Ji Tianxing prioritized the situation and didn't chase after them. He concealed himself again and looked for an opportunity to assassinate. The situation was still very tense. Only he, the War Dragon King, and 30-odd God Kings remained at the peak of the Golden Dragon Mountain. The 10,000 soldiers of the Myriad Demon Alliance and the 10,000 soldiers of the Mystical Grotto had long since left this area. More than 20,000 God Lords and 100 God Kings were divided into more than a dozen groups. They were either fighting or fleeing around the Golden Dragon Mountain. Looking at the overall situation, the Mystical Grotto had the advantage in numbers. They were basically attacking the Myriad Demon Alliance's soldiers with numbers. On the battlefield at the end of the Golden Dragon Mountain, Xueshong was in the limelight. He relied on Patriarch Cheung Chi's indestructible golden body to stand in an undefeatable position. He beat the left and right protectors and the 2 elders to a pulp. The situation on the other battlefields was similar. The 10,000 God Lords who had no leader were under the command of the Golden Dragon Guards. They had already stabilized their positions and were fighting back in an orderly manner. Although both sides had suffered casualties in the battle, the myriad demon alliance's casualties were obviously more serious. Ji Tianxing only took a moment to look at the situation and realized that the situation was not good. If he couldn't end the battle between the War Dragon King and these God Kings soon, the myriad demon alliance would still lose as time dragged on. Chapter 3777. War was never a simple matter. Moreover, this war concerned the position of the overlord of the Starsource continent. Abstruse Grotto Heaven had controlled the entire continent for more than 20,000 years. Its foundation was unimaginably strong. No matter how confident Ji Tianxing was and how he had planned everything in advance, things were still progressing smoothly. But in the end, the Myriad Demon Alliance was still not assured of victory. In fact, they were slowly losing. Only now did Ji Tianxing realize that he had underestimated Abstruse Grotto Heaven. Things were not as simple as they seemed. If nothing went wrong, even if the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not around, the Battle Dragon King and the others could still defend Abstruse Grotto Heaven. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing became anxious and increased the pace of his attacks. Swoosh! Swoosh! He stopped hiding and looking for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Instead, he revealed himself and brandished the Sword of Burial of Heaven. He used all sorts of sword Dao mystiques and killer moves to kill the God Kings. In an instant, the sky above the Golden Dragon Mountain was filled with dazzling sword light. The Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings heaved a sigh of relief when they saw Ji Tianxing no longer hiding. No matter how strong he was, as long as he fought openly, they would not be so afraid. However, after a few moments of fighting, the Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings' hearts tightened again. Ji Tianxing was indeed strong. His methods were ruthless and decisive. After exchanging just over 100 blows, 6 God Kings were killed on the spot. 9 God Kings were severely injured and lost their ability to fight. As for those God Kings whose bodies were destroyed, their godheads flew out of their bodies and fled in panic. But Ji Tianxing did not chase after them. He allowed them to escape and continued to kill the other God Kings. He did this so that he could destroy the combat strength of these God Kings in the shortest time possible and secure victory for the Myriad Demon Alliance. The Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings saw through his intentions. Therefore, they surrounded Ji Tianxing without any regard for their own safety. They did not expect to kill him on the spot, but they wanted to at least delay him. The War Dragon King told everyone that as long as they could delay Ji Tianxing for an hour, the mysterious Paradise's crisis would be resolved. The surviving God Kings did not think too much about it and believed his words. In their opinion, as long as they could stall Ji Tianxing for an hour, the army of the Myriad Demon Alliance would be slaughtered to the last. By then, there would only be Ji Tianxing left. No matter how strong he was, he would still be blasted into pieces under the siege of over 10,000 Sir Gods and over 100 Divine Kings. However, no one knew that the Battle Dragon King's words actually had another meaning. Swish! The Battle Dragon King and over 20 God Kings surrounded Ji Tianxing without any regard for their own safety. Just as he was about to be besieged by the crowd and fall into a dangerous situation, his figure disappeared into thin air. In the next instant, he appeared outside the encirclement like a ghost and attacked one of the God Kings as fast as lightning. Boom! As a few sword lights flashed, that God King let out a tragic cry. His head was chopped off on the spot, and his godhead shattered into pieces. It was only then that the Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings reacted and rushed over. Everyone's expression was ugly, and their eyes were filled with shock. Especially the Battle Dragon King, who found it even more unbelievable. He had already joined forces with the others and released nomological powers without any regard for the cost, sealing and confining this area. Logically speaking, Ji Tianxing should have had difficulty moving. He should not have been able to travel through space, much less teleport to evade. However, Ji Tianxing had done it. Moreover, it was smooth as if he was not affected at all. It was also because of this that the Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings' encirclement failed repeatedly. They were unable to delay Ji Tianxing. As time passed, the number of God Kings around the Battle Dragon King rapidly decreased. After 15 minutes, there were only 18 God Kings around him. Moreover, he had been attacked by Ji Tianxing several times. Although he had not been killed, nor had his divine body been destroyed, he had been severely injured, and his combat strength had greatly decreased. What made the Battle Dragon King even more anxious was that as the number of god kings around him decreased, Ji Tianxing became more and more ferocious. There was no way to restrain or block him. Not to mention the 18 god kings, even the Battle Dragon King himself was constantly in danger. He could be killed by Ji Tianxing at any time. The Battle Dragon King's heart was burning with anxiety. As he fought bravely, he used all his strength to contend with Ji Tianxing. At the same time, he prayed silently in his heart. I have already restrained Ji Tianxing for so long. You have twice the number of people compared to the myriad demon alliance. Don't disappoint me. And you said you would arrive at the mystical grotto today. Why haven't you appeared yet? If you dare to take advantage of your seniority and ruin my plans, the Dragon Emperor will definitely not forgive you. In the Battle Dragon King's prayer, the first you referred to the 10,000 soldiers of the mystical grotto. As for the second only he knew that they were 2 super experts. An expert who was even more tyrannical than him, in the sky above a ruin 80,000 miles away from the Golden Dragon Mountain. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu and Bai Feng, were still attacking Xueshong together. Below them, more than 4,000 monarch god experts were still fighting fiercely. All of them were bathed in blood. Xueshong had the protection of the indestructible golden body. Up until now, he was still unharmed. It was just that he had used up a lot of his divine power. As for the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu and the rest, they were already severely injured. All of them were covered in blood and looked miserable. Their auras were also very weak. After fighting for so long, they knew that Xueshong had a king-grade god artifact to protect him. He was undefeatable. However, they still had to fight to delay Xueshong and prevent him from causing a greater massacre and disaster. One should know that a 9th Heaven Realm God King with a king-grade god artifact would be invincible once he entered the battlefield. He could kill dozens or even hundreds of monarch god experts with a wave of his hand. He could kill more than 1,000 monarch god experts within an hour. Although he was not as powerful as Ji Tianxing, Alliance Master Luo Hu, or Golden Origin Dragon Emperor, he was still a super killer on the battlefield. However, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the rest were already severely injured. After fighting with Xueshong for so long, they could not hold on any longer. Everyone looked at the other end of the Golden Dragon mountain range, where Ji Tianxing and the Battle Dragon King were, as if they were looking forward to seeing them. A few of them were also praying silently in their hearts. Young Master, oh young Master, quickly settle the battle over there and come help everyone. If you don't come, all the men in our alliance will be killed. Young Lord, although you have a perfect plan and are good at commanding troops, there are too few of us. We are no match for Xuanji Grotto Heaven. My lord, even if you don't save us, the 2 mistresses are still fighting a bloody battle. You should quickly settle the strong enemy over there and help the 2 mistresses out. There was no doubt that the last sentence was Bai Feng's prayer. After the tens of thousands of soldiers from the Myriad Demon Alliance left the Divine Clock World, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Bai Feng, and Chao Qingyu also left the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower and joined the battle. Chapter 3778. At the same time, at the end of the Golden Dragon Mountain, 100,000 miles away from Ji Tianxing, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and Yank were leading more than 2,000 Sir God experts in a fierce battle against 4,000 people from Xuanji Grotto. Although the 4,000 Sir Gods came from different forces, their leaders had been assassinated by Ji Tianxing. However, not long after the battle began, 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders led 300 Golden Dragon Guards to take over the Sir Gods. The 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders were very powerful. They were the best among the middle-level godly kings. The 300 Golden Dragon Guards were also top-notch Sir God experts. Among them, there were a dozen Golden Dragon Guard captains who were low-level godly kings. Comparing the 2 sides, Xuanji Grotto had more people and more powerful experts. No matter how much Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others fought bravely, it was impossible for them to turn the tide. So far, the battle had lasted for 30 minutes. More than 800 Sir Gods from the 10,000 Demon League had died. Yun Yarrow, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and Yank were also severely injured. Their robes were stained with blood and they looked battered and exhausted. As for the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders and the dozen Golden Dragon Guard captains, they were obviously in a much better state. Although they were also injured, they still had the advantage in numbers. However, they still had the advantage in numbers, and their injuries were lighter. If the battle continued to drag on, Yun Yaro, Jiku, and the others would definitely be defeated. Therefore, Yun Yaro, Jiku, and the others were also paying attention to the other end of the Golden Dragon Mountain. They were worried about Ji Tianxing's safety and prayed silently in their hearts. Ji Tianxing was also very anxious. In order to get rid of the godly kings in front of him as soon as possible, he even changed his usual style. If it were in the past, he would definitely kill those godly kings completely. He would even smash their godheads into pieces. He would never let them escape. But now, he only wanted to end the battle quickly so that he could rush to the 10,000 Demon League soldiers and his friends. Just now, in this short period of time, he had killed another 6 god kings. Now, only the War Dragon King and the 12 god kings were left. Sword of Destruction. In his anxiety, Ji Tianxing found an opportunity to absorb the power of the 5 elements world and used this ultimate skill. The 10,000-meter-long golden sword of light slashed toward the Battle Dragon King and the 3 god kings with devastating power. At that moment, the sky was sliced apart by the sword light, and a huge crack appeared in the void. Unparalleled divine might and heaven-reaching sword intent enveloped the Battle Dragon King and the 3 god kings, making them unable to move. Their faces were filled with fear and despair. Not far away, the 9 god kings were also heavily injured. Seeing that shocking sword slash down, they were scared out of their wits and fled in panic. Even though they knew that the sword was not aimed at them. However, the might of that sword light was too shocking. They didn't dare get too close for fear of being caught in the crossfire, so they naturally had to flee as far as possible. At this critical moment, the War Dragon King roared angrily. He was actually able to maintain his calm and join forces with the 3 god kings to create a temporary formation to block the attack. Kaboom! In the next instant, the heaven-splitting divine sword of light slashed into the battle formation created by the 4 god kings, striking the huge 5-colored barrier of light. Following a deafening explosion, the 5-colored light barrier instantly collapsed, and fragments of divine light burst out in all directions. The violent shockwave formed a 5-colored torrent that swept into the distance. However, the divine sword of light did not weaken as it struck the War Dragon King and the 3 god kings. The protective divine light and armor of the 3 god kings shattered on the spot. Their bodies also exploded into bits and pieces, spraying into the sky along with their blood. The 3 god kings were killed on the spot, and even their godheads shattered. Even the strongest of them, the War Dragon King, was sent flying thousands of miles away with blood spurting out of his orifices. His protective divine light had already shattered, and so had his armor. Even the divine spear in his hand cracked, and its light became extremely dim. Boom! With a loud explosion, the War Dragon King crashed into the ruined Golden Dragon mountain range, creating a huge crater in the ground and sending dust into the air. He lay at the bottom of the crater, covered in blood and dust. His appearance was too horrible to look at. Cough cough, his injuries were too severe, and several cracks had appeared on his divine body. He could not help but cough and spit out dirty blood. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing flashed and appeared above the crater. War Dragon King, die! Ji Tianxing roared as he slashed down with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. As long as he killed the War Dragon King, the Xuanji Grotto Heaven would lose its commander, and chaos would ensue. However, what Ji Tianxing did not expect was that the 9 god kings, who were scared out of their wits, would charge over without any regard for their own safety and join forces to stop him. Don't you dare harm the Grand Marshal. Long Tian, you bastard, I'll kill you. Long Tian, let's die together. The 9 god kings attacked Ji Tianxing in a frenzy, shouting and roaring at the top of their lungs. There were even people who stood in front of him and resolutely self-destructed. Ji Tianxing was confused. Weren't these god kings scared out of their wits? Why did they suddenly become so brave? He focused his eyes and realized that the 9 god kings were all commanders of the Golden Dragon Guard. It was obvious that the War Dragon King held an extremely high position in their hearts, and they revered him greatly. In order to protect the War Dragon King, they would rather die in battle. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Ji Tianxing swung the sword of burial of heaven and killed 3 god kings in an instant. However, the other 6 god kings were not intimidated by him. They continued to charge over as if they had gone mad. There was even someone who shouted at the War Dragon King, "Grand Marshal, run!" The War Dragon King forced his heavily injured body to stand up at the bottom of the crater. Seeing the Golden Dragon Guard commanders risking their lives to save him, he was filled with hot blood. His eyes were red, and he was extremely angry. However, he was not an impulsive person. He knew that everyone had sacrificed their lives to save him. If he acted rashly, everyone would have died in vain. Thus, he roared angrily, "Brothers, I swear that I will avenge all of you." After shouting, he decisively turned around and fled, flying into the depths of the mysterious grotto heaven. Ji Tianxing subconsciously wanted to chase after them, but the 4 god kings didn't fear death and kept pestering him. 2 of the god kings had already self-detonated. Boom! Boom! Following 2 loud explosions that shook the 9 heavens, 2 dazzling balls of 5-colored divine light exploded in the sky. Like 2 huge mushroom clouds, they rose and rolled in the sky and quickly spread out, covering a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. The self-destruction of 2 mid-level god kings was enough to destroy the entire Golden Dragon Mountain range. In that instant, Ji Tianxing did not have time to dodge, so he could only escape into the primordial chaos bell. The 4 god kings closest to him were all covered in blood, and they looked wretched and hideous. However, when they saw the War Dragon King escape, they all looked as if they had been relieved of a heavy burden. Immediately after, they were engulfed by the dazzling divine light. Like snow under the scorching sun, they quickly melted and disintegrated. Book Guesthouse Reading Website. Chapter 3779. The shockwave from the 2 godly kings' self-destruction swept across the entire Golden Dragon Mountain like a colorful flood. After the shockwave reached a radius of 100,000 miles, it spread out for another 100,000 miles before gradually dissipating. Fortunately, this was the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, where the space was stable. The Golden Dragon Mountain was personally refined by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor, so it was extremely sturdy. Therefore, the power of the 2 godly kings' self-destruction was halved. If this was any other region in the Dragon Realm, the power of the 2 godly kings' self-destruction would be enough to turn everything within a radius of 300,000 miles into ruins. However, the self-destruction this time only turned the majestic Golden Dragon Mountain into dilapidated mountains and ravines. When the shockwave reached a radius of 100,000 miles, its power was halved. Although it also destroyed many mountains, and forests. However, the godly kings and godly lords who were engaged in the battle did not suffer much damage. Only about 2,000 unlucky godly lords who were close to the explosion were blasted into smithereens by the shockwave. There were also about 1,000 godly lords who were severely injured by the shockwave. They were unconscious or had lost their ability to fight. About 4,000 people were unlucky. Half of them were from the 10,000 Demon Alliance and the other half were from the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. As for the godly kings, they all had life-saving methods and trump cards, so they were basically fine. However, this self-detonation caught everyone off guard and gave them a fright. Whether it was Xueshong, the commander of the Golden Dragon Guards, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, or the others, their hearts were in their throats as they were extremely worried. Everyone was very anxious as they secretly wondered who had been forced to self-destruct. How was the battle between Ji Tianxing and the Battle Dragon King? Why was someone forced to self-destruct? Therefore, the battle between the 2 sides stopped for a moment. Without a doubt, the people who had besieged and harassed Ji Tianxing had all been dealt with. The Battle Dragon King was severely injured and had escaped. Half of the 40 godly kings who besieged Ji Tianxing had their divine bodies destroyed. Only their godheads were left and had escaped. No one knew where they were hiding. The other half were killed on the spot and had their bones crushed. Of course, their quintessence fragments and spatial rings had all fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands. A moment later, when the overwhelming divine light shock wave dissipated and the loud noise that reverberated between heaven and earth disappeared, the primordial bell of primordial chaos reappeared. Shua. This simple and unadorned pitch-black divine bell was located at the center of the God King's self-detonation. It had withstood the most terrifying power. Although its defense was strong and invincible, it was not injured. Ji Tianxing, who hid in the God Clock in time, did not suffer any harm. However, it was still sent flying tens of thousands of miles away by the violent impact, smashing into the ruins at the edge of the Golden Dragon mountain range. 100-mile-wide crater was created on the ground, and the surrounding area was densely covered in cracks, looking like a spider web. Ji Tianxing controlled the primordial chaos bell and rushed toward the end of the Golden Dragon mountain range. The Battle Dragon King had already escaped. For the time being, he didn't have any thoughts of eliminating the Battle Dragon King. He just wanted to hurry over and help everyone. The primordial bell of primordial chaos turned into invisible dust and flew quickly in the sky, approaching the battlefield at an extremely fast speed. Ji Tianxing released his divine consciousness and scanned the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. He quickly saw that the 10,000 godlords from the Myriad Demon Alliance and the mystical Grotto Heaven were fighting in several different battlefields. Due to the impact of the two God Kings' self-detonation, the few battlefields had temporarily calmed down. Both sides had stopped fighting. However, it was obvious that the Myriad Demon Alliance had fewer people, and the mystical Grotto Heaven had the upper hand. Fortunately, the difference in the number of God Kings on both sides was not that great. The mystical Grotto Heaven originally had more than 210 God King experts. Before the battle began, Ji Tianxing had already assassinated more than 80 of them. The 40 God Kings that had besieged him earlier were all killed by him. At that moment, the mystical Grotto Heaven only had about 80 God Kings left. As for the Myriad Demon Alliance, including Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and Chao Qingyu, there were only 72 God Kings. Although they did not have the advantage in numbers, it did not affect them too much. Ji Tianxing believed that victory would belong to the Myriad Demon Alliance in the end. The shockwaves from the two God Kings' self-detonation had temporarily calmed the battlefield for 100 breaths. However, after both sides came to their senses and recovered, they continued to fight. It was as cruel as ever. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, Bai Feng, and the others became more and more worried and anxious. There were a few times when they could not help but go to the area of the explosion to see what was going on. Their injuries had worsened, and they were practically covered in blood. They had also used up more than half of their divine power and were gradually weakening. Could it be that the young master did not defeat the War Dragon King and those God Kings and has met with misfortune? This thought flashed through the minds of the left and right protectors and Hu Xinyu. The three of them began to feel pessimistic, and their expressions became more and more serious. Fortunately, at that moment, Ji Tianxing's voice suddenly rang out in their minds. The War Dragon King has escaped with heavy injuries. I am safe and sound. Hold on for a while longer. Once I have dealt with the other battlefields, I will come and help you. Everyone was in a state of despair. When they heard Ji Tianxing's words, it was as if they had heard a heavenly voice. Their despair and pessimism were swept away. The pain and exhaustion that covered their bodies also disappeared in an instant. Everyone's spirits were lifted, and they became energetic again. Their fighting spirit was high. Although they looked around, they did not see Ji Tianxing's figure. However, they guessed that Ji Tianxing must have a motive for hiding and not appearing. Therefore, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and Bai Feng were no longer anxious and worried. The four of them cast their spells in an orderly manner and joined forces to restrain Xueshong. On the other side, Ji Tianxing steered the primordial chaos bell and quietly flew to the battlefield where Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others were. At that moment, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others were severely injured, and their divine power was also very weak. The 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders who were besieging them were still very strong, and their injuries were relatively light. They watched as the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders closed in on them. They caught a flaw in Chao Qingyu's defense, and 2 of them immediately used their ultimate skills to kill him. Instantly, Chao Qingyu was drowned in divine light, and hundreds of laws and divine powers were about to strangle him to death. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing brazenly attacked. He waved the burial of heaven's sword and slashed out sword shadows that filled the sky. Bam! 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 With a series of muffled sounds, the divine powers of the two Golden Dragon Guard commanders were defeated, and Chao Qingyu was safe. Seeing Ji Tianxing suddenly appear, Chao Qingyu, Yank, Yun Yarrow, and Ji Ku were all stunned for a moment. Then, they were filled with joy. As for the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders, when they saw his appearance, they were instantly shocked and filled with fear. They knew that the Battle Dragon King and the 40 God Kings had been besieging Ji Tianxing. Now that Ji Tianxing had appeared safe and sound, didn't that mean that, without waiting for the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders to think carefully, Ji Tianxing had already attacked at lightning speed? He waved his sword and a cold gleam appeared. Sword of Daytime. That extremely bright cold gleam instantly expanded by hundreds of millions of times. It turned into a blazing golden sun that covered the sky and swallowed the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3780. The 6 Golden Dragon Guards reacted differently under the dazzling sword light. Some of them turned around and ran away in fear. Some of them roared in despair. Some of them knew that they couldn't escape, so they tried their best to resist. Kaboom! However, everything they did was in vain. With an earth-shattering explosion, the dazzling sun exploded. Billions of pieces of golden light wrapped around the flesh and blood of the commanders. Countless blood flowers bloomed in the sky. The 6 Golden Dragon Guards were all middle-level divine kings. How could they resist Ji Tianxing's sword principle unique skill? In an instant, 5 Golden Dragon Guards were smashed into pieces. Even their godheads were shattered. Only one of them was lucky. His godhead escaped, but his godhead was still intact. Under Ji Tianxing's purposeful control, the explosion of the daylight sword was limited to a radius of 10 miles. Otherwise, the shockwave and sword essence from the explosion of the sword light would spread across a few thousand miles and affect many people. Not only would the people from the Xuanji Cave Heaven be affected, but the divine emperors from the 10,000 Demon Alliance would also be killed by the sword light. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing's control of power and laws had reached an extremely precise and subtle level. The daylight sword was able to kill or severely injure the 6 Golden Dragon Guards, but it wouldn't hurt the others. After the 6 Golden Dragon Guards were killed, Ji Ku, Yun Yarrow, Chao Qingyu and the others felt a lot less pressured. Ji Tianxing went after the Golden Dragon Guard commander who ran away. In a flash, he caught up with the Godhead and destroyed it in 2 moves. The Godhead fragments and interspatial rings fell from the sky and were taken by him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others quickly took divine elixirs to suppress their injuries. Not far away, a dozen Golden Dragon Guards captains and 2,000 divine emperors from the Xuanji Cave Heaven were dumbfounded. They were scared out of their wits. They originally had the upper hand. As long as they fought steadily, they would definitely win. However, the 6 Golden Dragon Guards captains were killed. The situation took a turn for the worse. Everyone began to panic. Their momentum immediately weakened. Even the power of their attacks was greatly reduced. Instead, it was the 1,000-odd divine lords from the Myriad Demon League that were previously at a disadvantage. They were suppressed and forced to retreat. Seeing the acting chief appear out of nowhere and kill several Golden Dragon Guard commanders in seconds, everyone's morale was greatly boosted and their blood was boiling. Their spirit and faith supported them, allowing them to erupt with even more ferocious fighting spirit and launch an intense counterattack. After a while, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and Yank also suppressed their injuries and recuperated their divine powers and auras. They charged into the battlefield once again and attacked the dozen captains of the Golden Dragon Guards. With their middle-level divine king strength, dealing with those low-level divine kings could be said to be more than enough. After only a dozen moves, 2 Golden Dragon Guards were killed and 3 were severely injured. This caused the morale of both sides to rise and fall, and the situation was quickly reversed. As long as there were no accidents, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others would definitely win. At the same time, Ji Tianxing had already moved to another battlefield. Although his strength was close to that of a peak divine king, if he joined the battle, he would definitely be able to kill a group of divine lords quickly. However, he didn't do so. It would take too much time and wouldn't change the situation much. As the commander of the Myriad Demon League, of course, he couldn't keep an eye on the divine lords of the Xuanji Grotto. His target was naturally the commanders and divine kings of the Xuanji Grotto. This was because he knew very well that the true winner of a war was always the strong. Only by killing the commanders and experts of the Xuanji Grotto could he secure victory. Swish! Ji Tianxing silently arrived at a battlefield and teleported behind a middle-level divine king. This middle-level divine king was a territorial lord under the command of the Xuanji Grotto. On the battlefield, there were 12 divine kings from the Xuanji Grotto leading more than 3,000 divine lords. Their opponents were the 3rd Elder, 4th Elder, and 5th Elder of the Myriad Demon League. There were a total of 10 divine kings and more than 1,000 divine lords. Before Ji Tianxing appeared, the elders of the Myriad Demon League were severely injured. One of them even had his divine body destroyed, leaving him with only a godhead. However, his godhead had nowhere to go, so it attached itself to the 3rd Elder's body. The 1,000 divine lords of the Myriad Demon League were also severely injured. Their numbers were rapidly decreasing. However, after Ji Tianxing appeared, he instantly killed a territorial lord with a thunderous strike. The other divine kings from the Xuanji Grotto were all stunned by Ji Tianxing. They were stunned for a moment before they were filled with shock. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing performed a few more sword Dao techniques consecutively and killed a few more divine kings. Immediately, the experts of the Xuanji Grotto were terrified. Their morale hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League were greatly encouraged. Their morale soared. The situation immediately reversed. The Xuanji Grotto's side was forced to retreat, and the Myriad Demon League would definitely win. Thus, Ji Tianxing quietly left and rushed to the next battlefield. The next few battlefields all had similar situations. The soldiers of the Myriad Demon League were originally at a disadvantage. They had suffered heavy casualties and were in a very dangerous situation. However, after Ji Tianxing arrived and quickly killed a group of divine kings, the situation was reversed. The Xuanji Grotto's side was anxious and their morale was low. On the other hand, the morale of the Myriad Demon League's side was high. The soldiers' fighting spirit was high. Under this situation, the scales of victory continued to tilt towards the Myriad Demon League. About 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing helped the 6 battlefields resolve the crisis. After turning the situation around, he went to help the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the others. At this time, everyone's injuries were even worse than before. Even though the 3 of them surrounded Xueshong, they were unable to hurt him. Instead, they were beaten to a miserable state by Xueshong. Their divine bodies were almost destroyed. They were extremely weak and had almost no strength to continue fighting. If not for the fact that Ji Tianxing was safe and sound and had defeated the Battle Dragon King, they would have lost their mental support. It was because they knew that Ji Tianxing was currently helping the other members of the League and would soon come to their aid that they could hold on until now. Otherwise, they would have given up resisting. Now that Ji Tianxing had finally made a move, they could finally see the light of day. They finally saw hope for victory. As for Xueshong, although he was in an invincible position and had not suffered any substantial injuries after fighting for so long. However, he had used up a lot of his divine power and was mentally exhausted. The left and right protectors and Hu Xinyu he faced were both peak 8th and 9th stage divine kings. They were not much weaker than him. If not for old ancestor Cheung Chi's indestructible golden body, he would not be a match for the 3 of them. On one hand, he was exhausted. At the same time, he was mentally and physically exhausted. Deep in his heart, he was anxious and worried. He already knew that Ji Tianxing was safe and sound and that the Battle Dragon King had escaped with serious injuries. Including Qin Yu being assassinated by Ji Tianxing, that was also something he saw on the spot. Of the 2 commanders of the Xuanji Grotto, one was dead and the other was injured. Other than him, no one could go against Ji Tianxing. However, Due to the heavenly oath, he could not deal with Ji Tianxing. How could he not be anxious? Chapter 3781. Ji Tianxing appeared at the end of the Golden Dragon mountain range and killed 2 godly kings with lightning speed. This immediately attracted the attention of a dozen godly kings. Even Xueshong looked over cautiously. The battle between Xueshong and the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the others stopped for a moment. Ji Tianxing no longer concealed himself. He appeared in the open and flew toward Xueshong and the others. He glanced at the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the others. Seeing that they were covered in wounds and looked like they were made of blood, his heart skipped a beat. You guys retreat first. Leave this to me. Ji Tianxing flew across the sky with sword in hand. Under everyone's gaze, he flew toward Xueshong. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the others hurriedly acknowledged the order. They retreated far away and consumed elixirs to suppress their injuries. When Ji Tianxing was 10,000 feet away from Xueshong, he stopped in the sky. The scene immediately quieted down. Whether it was the Myriad Demon Alliance or the Xuanji Grotto, they all looked at Ji Tianxing and Xueshong. It was common knowledge that the two of them were the strongest cultivators in the Xuanji Wonderland. In other words, the outcome of the battle was in their hands. The atmosphere was heavy. The experts of the Xuanji Grotto had gloomy expressions. Even Xueshong's eyes were evasive. He did not dare to meet Ji Tianxing's eyes. His aura was weaker than before. Xueshong, Qin Yu is dead. The Battle Dragon King has escaped with heavy injuries. The Xuanji Grotto is leaderless. What are you still struggling for? Ji Tianxing looked at Xueshong with a stern expression and questioned him calmly. Xueshong frowned. Anxiety and helplessness flashed across his eyes. Indeed, the Xuanji Grotto was doomed. Unless the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor appeared, there was no way they could turn the tables. However, he knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor would not return anytime soon. Therefore, the Xuanji Grotto's defeat was inevitable. Ji Tianxing was right. No matter how he struggled, it was futile. Moreover, he was only temporarily relying on the Xuanji Grotto. He was not their subordinate. Since they were seeking refuge, they could give up and betray them at the crucial moment. If not for the fact that he was worried that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor would come after him, he would have fled long ago. Of course, if he were to escape, he would definitely do it quietly and would not make a fuss about it. Now that Ji Tianxing was being so overbearing in front of so many people, he couldn't possibly lower his head and admit defeat, much less run away. If he dared to abandon over 10,000 soldiers and escape alone, he would become the laughingstock of the entire Stellar Origin continent, the target of everyone's disdain and contempt. For the next tens of thousands of years, he would be nailed to the pillar of shame, unable to turn the tables. Therefore, he could only brace himself and say righteously, as the saying goes, a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. Long Tian, you should understand this principle. I've always believed that the geniuses of the Enigma Grotto are the masters of this continent, and the Myriad Demon Alliance is not qualified. Since I've chosen to assist the Enigma Grotto Heaven, I'll stick to it until the end. I won't change my mind easily. When his voice spread across tens of thousands of li, the thousands of soldiers of the mysterious paradise all cheered and looked at him with admiration. Just now, these people were still worried that Xueshong would run away. With Xueshong's strength and methods, he had a chance to escape, but the thousands of soldiers were destined to die here. Now that they heard his impassioned declaration, the officers and soldiers felt reassured. Naturally, their morale was greatly boosted, and their fighting spirit was rekindled. Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows and sneered, "You've always been treacherous and two-faced. You're just putting on an act when you say those words. Don't forget your heavenly oath. With me here, you won't have a chance to make a move." Xueshong frowned and his face turned ugly. He was silent and seemed to be deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking. Perhaps, he was hesitating and weighing whether to give up or not. But at this moment, a deep and dignified male voice came from the distant ruins. "Long Tian, you wishful-thinking thief, you're too naive. Do you think that the position of the overlord of the Enigma Grotto Heaven is something you can easily shake? The angry roar was like rolling thunder, reverberating between heaven and earth. It instantly woke up more than 10,000 people on the battlefield. Many people were familiar with this voice. They all looked to the north with surprise, disbelief, worry, and fear. Then, everyone saw a tall and sturdy figure, wrapped in a dazzling golden light, quickly fly into the sky above the battlefield. The figure shrouded in golden light was none other than the armored war dragon king. He had already changed into a new set of armor and helmet. The divine spear in his hand was also something no one had seen before. His face was very pale, and there were 2 hideous wounds on his cheeks. But other than that, no one could see the injuries on his body, nor did they know how serious his injuries were. Everyone only felt that the battle dragon king was wrapped in a sacred golden light, and he looked extremely valiant and intimidating. Only experts like Ji Tianxing, the left and right protectors, and Shueshong could sense that the battle dragon king was indeed severely injured and very weak. He had purposely changed his armor and covered his body with golden light. It was just a bluff to hide his weakness. But this move was very effective against the soldiers of the Enigma Grotto Heaven. Seeing the heavily injured battle dragon king return to the battlefield majestically, the nearly 10,000 soldiers of the Enigma Grotto Heaven cheered in joy. It was just a heavily injured battle dragon king. Ji Tianxing naturally did not take it to heart. However, when his gaze landed behind the battle dragon king and saw 2 unfamiliar godly king experts, he suddenly became vigilant. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the experts of the Myriad Demon Alliance also stared at the 2 figures cautiously. The 2 mysterious experts of unknown origins had very distinct appearances. On the left was a skinny, golden-haired elder more than 10 feet tall. He wore a golden robe embroidered with silver starry patterns. His entire body was filled with a sacred and peaceful aura. Judging from this elder's appearance, his cheeks were long, and his chin and nose were very sharp. He seemed to have been transformed from a divine bird. As for the godly king expert on the right, he was nearly 3 feet tall and his body was as sturdy as a small mountain. He had a flat face, a flat nose, a wide mouth, and rows of uneven fangs. From his appearance and the aura he emitted, Ji Tianxing could vaguely guess that he was from the sea race. Most importantly, these 2 godly king experts of unknown origins were surrounded by formless divine law patterns. Their strength was unfathomable. Obviously, these 2 were peak 9th stage godly kings. They might even be peak godly kings. Realizing this, Ji Tianxing hurriedly sent a message to the left and right protectors. On the Star Source continent, other than the old Alliance Master and the Golden Dragon Emperor, who else is a peak godly king? The left and right protectors were stunned. They frowned and thought carefully for a moment. Suddenly, they thought of something and their expressions changed. Chapter 3782. Young Master, there are indeed 2 more peak divine kings on the Star Source continent. One is the old divine king who was born in the ancient times and made his name 20,000 years ago, Patriarch Golden Rock. The other is a rising star in the recent 1,000 years, Divine King War Whale. The left and right protectors guessed the answer and hurriedly reported it to Ji Tianxing. Their tones were complicated, low, and filled with worry. After a moment of silence, the 2 seemed to be afraid that Ji Tianxing did not understand the situation, so they took the initiative to explain. The Golden Rock tribe has always been in the 9 mystical Grotto Heaven, far away from the secular world. Patriarch Golden Rock has not shown himself for 10,000 years and has always been in seclusion to cultivate. As for Divine King War Whale, he has been very active in the southern sea region of the continent for the past 1,000 years and has a high reputation. There is a sea region in the southern part of the continent that is the territory of the War Whale tribe. It is called the War Whale Sea region. There is a blessed land that has been occupied by the War Whale tribe for 10,000 years. Divine King War Whale is the current leader of the War Whale tribe. He is extremely talented and obtained a fortuitous opportunity in the southern sea's bottomless ruins. That is how he became a peak divine king and allowed the War Whale tribe to rise. After hearing the left and right protector's explanation, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly to show that he understood. At this time, War Dragon King spoke again. He looked down at everyone with a confident smile and said in a dignified tone, Long Tien, and the rebels of the Myriad Demon Alliance, listen up. The two people standing behind me right now are the most respected experts on the continent. I believe many of you have already guessed. That's right, these two are Patriarch Golden Rock and Divine King War Whale. The mysterious Grotto Heaven is the overlord of the Star Source continent and the ruler of the continent. These two experts did not care about worldly affairs, but they could not bear to see war break out everywhere and the people suffer. That is why they acted to uphold justice and pacify the disaster. The rebels of the Myriad Demon Alliance should have been sentenced to death for committing such heinous crimes. None of them should be spared. However, His Majesty the Dragon Emperor is benevolent, and these two experts are also merciful and compassionate. They do not want to commit more crimes. As long as you surrender now and seal your divine power, I can spare your lives. I promise you that I will not kill the ordinary members of the Alliance. I will only kill the main culprit to warn the world. The Battle Dragon King's voice was full of vigor and confidence. It was as if he had the entire situation under his control. The facts were indeed so. With the assistance of two peak divine kings, the profound Paradise's victory was indeed in their grasp. Especially when he loudly announced the identities of the two peak divine kings, the 10,000 over people on the battlefield were all in an uproar. Everyone was stunned, their faces filled with astonishment. Then, everyone from the abstruse cave erupted in earth-shattering cheers. They were extremely excited. Everyone's face was brimming with joy and excitement from escaping death. The 6,000 members of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, on the other hand, were all overwhelmed with fear and desperation. They had never expected that this war would have so many twists and turns. The 10,000 Demon Alliance had just secured the victory and was about to claim it. Who would have thought that the mysterious Paradise would turn the tables in the end? This result was unacceptable to many people. Then, everyone heard the Battle Dragon King's declaration of surrender. The soldiers of the abstruse cave were naturally beside themselves with joy. They looked at their enemies with ridicule and pity, waiting to see the humiliating scene of them kneeling and begging to surrender. The 6,000 members of the 10,000 Demon Alliance were filled with grief and humiliation, but there was nothing they could do. Most of them refused to give up. They did not want to give up so easily, but they also did not want to be humiliated. They all looked at Ji Tianxing and the left and right protectors. As long as the acting alliance leader and the two protectors did not express their stance, they would not beg to surrender. However, there were still a few people who despaired. They thought that if they continued to resist, they would definitely die. Since that was the case, they might as well surrender and save their lives. At least the Battle Dragon King would not go back on his words. However, what made the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance anxious and uneasy was that Ji Tianxing was expressionless and did not react. He only secretly used his divine sense to send an order to the left and right protectors, take 1,000 men and rush to the exit of the mysterious Paradise. Kill everyone there and control the exit. The left and right protectors were stunned. They did not understand what he meant. They asked, "Young master, why are we controlling the exit now? What we need to deal with now are the two peak divine kings. Young master, are you going to fight to the death and break out of the encirclement?" Ji Tianxing did not even turn his head. He continued to explain, "Our reinforcements have arrived. Go control the exit and coordinate with the outside to bring them in." "Ah, reinforcements? What reinforcements? Who will come to help us?" The left and right protectors were pleasantly surprised but also very confused. Ji Tianxing did not explain further. The two did not ask any more questions. They hurriedly led their men and left the battlefield. At this time, the two sides had already stopped fighting. They gathered into two groups and faced each other in the sky. Even when they saw the left and right protectors take 1,000 men away, the War Dragon King and Shueshong did not stop them. As for Forefather Golden Rock and God King Battle Whale, they were like divine objects, watching everything with indifferent expressions. After all, their identities were special. They only needed to stand there. They did not need to do anything to represent everything. Seeing the Myriad Demon Alliance's silence, the War Dragon King was furious. He wanted to persuade them to surrender again. This time, his attitude was even fiercer. He would not be amicable. After all, his injuries were very serious. They had already damaged the foundation of his divine Tao. He only wanted to settle this matter as soon as possible so that he could go into seclusion to heal. However, before he could speak, Ji Tianxing stepped forward. He looked at the two peak divine kings and asked, "Divine King Battle Whale, although the South Sea Blessed Land is to the south of the continent, and the Myriad Demon Alliance is to the northwest of the continent, we do not have much interaction. However, I believe that there is no enmity between us. Now that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor is not here, why are you getting involved in this mess and showing your support for the mysterious paradise?" Divine King Battle Whale, who was as sturdy as a mountain, had been looking down with an indifferent expression. Now, he opened his eyes wide and looked at Ji Tianxing with a frown. He exuded a sacred aura that struck fear in others. He was not angry. Instead, he said with a playful smile, "Indeed, I do not have much interaction with the Myriad Demon Alliance. However, the South Sea Blessed Land and our Battle Whale tribe are indebted to the mysterious paradise for their help. Naturally, I have to return the favor. There are hundreds of divine kings and hundreds of first-rate factions on the continent. None of them dare to interfere. That is because they are too weak to participate. They are afraid that they will be implicated. However, the Battle Whale tribe and I do not have such concerns. We have the right to show our support. Long Tian, what do you think?" Since the other party had made it so clear, Ji Tianxing did not say anything more. He nodded slightly and turned his head to look at the Golden Rock ancestor. "Forefather Golden Rock, speaking of which, we have met once before. You are an old senior who does not care about worldly affairs. Why are you suddenly interfering?" Chapter 3783. Ji Tianxing looked at Forefather Golden Rock without a trace of hatred or killing intent. Even his tone was a little playful and puzzled. Many of the god kings present frowned when they heard that. They became interested. Forefather Golden Rock was also stunned. He looked at Ji Tianxing for a while, and suddenly his golden eyebrows twitched as he recalled some old memories. "Oh, I remember now. You're Long Tian. That Long Tian, the last disciple of Dragon Emperor Feng Tian, more than 1,300 years ago, when Heavenly Dragon Emperor came to visit this old man, he brought you with him." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and smiled. "That's right." The Golden Rock Patriarch stared at Ji Tianxing, his golden eyes filled with reminiscence. His tone was low and deep. "Sigh. Things change with the passage of time. The past is still vivid in my mind, but 1,000 years have passed in the blink of an eye. This old man still remembers. Back then, Tianlong Emperor took great care of you and praised you greatly, and you were also heroic, confident and arrogant. I didn't expect that Dragon Emperor Feng Tian had already passed away, and you've grown to such a level." Forefather Golden Rock stroked his golden beard, and his thin cheeks revealed an envious expression. "In terms of judging people and teaching according to their abilities, I'm indeed far inferior to Dragon Emperor Feng Tian." Seeing that Ji Tianxing and Forefather Golden Rock knew each other and were talking about old times in public, War Dragon King's expression was a little unpleasant. He was hesitating whether to remind Forefather Golden Rock not to act on his emotions. Forefather Golden Rock put away his reminiscence and said to Ji Tianxing, "Long Tian, although I'm good friends with your master and have some ties with you, this matter concerns the safety of this world. However, today's matter concerns the situation and safety of the entire Starsource continent. Please forgive this old man for not condoning or playing favorites." Xuanji Grotto Heaven was the rightful overlord of the Starsource continent, and had controlled the continent for more than 20,000 years. Although it had experienced many storms and twists and turns, it was generally peaceful. It was a time of peace and prosperity now. Billions of common people were able to live and work in peace, cultivate in peace, prolong their lives, and pursue the divine Tao. The foundation of the Myriad Demon Alliance was still shallow. It was unwise for them to start a war so recklessly to shake the Xuanji paradise. In the end, both sides would suffer great losses, and the stable situation of the Starsource continent would fall into chaos and danger. In the end, no one knew who would be able to unify the world and control the Starsource continent again. However, I am certain that during this process, the Star Source continent will definitely be embroiled in the flames of war that will last for countless years. In order to prevent the common people from suffering, I had no choice but to accept the War Dragon King's invitation and make a trip to the Enigma Paradise. Although Patriarch Golden Rock said that he did not care about old ties and that he could not be biased, he did not care. However, the only reason he was willing to explain in such detail was because of the sky-sealing Dragon Emperor. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was deep in thought, the Golden Rock Patriarch continued, Long Tian, listen to my advice. Give up. For the sake of the people in the world and the tens of thousands of members of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, you should retreat. I guarantee you with my reputation that no one will make things difficult for you. Of course, if the Golden Dragon Emperor wants to take revenge on you in the future, that's your problem. Many of the God Kings widened their eyes in shock when they heard that. The War Dragon King's expression changed drastically. He instinctively cried out, no, absolutely not. He had long since made up his mind that no matter what, he would kill Ji Tianxing today and eliminate this great threat. In the end, the Golden Rock Patriarch still decided to be biased. He actually wanted to guarantee Ji Tianxing's safety. The War Dragon King was so angry that his liver hurt. He cursed in his heart, what a cunning old bastard. Not only do you want to win the good name of saving the common people, you also want to preserve the friendship of your old friends. Damned feathered beast. Of course, no matter how angry the War Dragon King was, he could only curse in his heart. On the surface, he did not dare to show any disrespect or anger. After all, he still needed the Golden Rock Patriarch to hold the fort. No one knew that Ji Tianxing's silence was not because he was thinking about the Golden Rock Patriarch's words. In fact, he was communicating with Peng Fei in the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Peng Fei, what is your relationship with the Golden Rock Patriarch? Peng Fei was cultivating in seclusion in the Divine Pagoda. He was caught off guard by Ji Tianxing's question. After calming down, he calmed himself down and replied, Young Master Long, didn't you ask this question a long time ago? I am a disciple of the Golden Rock tribe. Of course I am a descendant of the Golden Rock Patriarch. Ji Tianxing did not give up. He continued, all members of the Golden Rock tribe can be called descendants of the Golden Rock Patriarch. But what I want to ask is, are you and the Golden Rock Patriarch's direct descendants? What is your seniority? This. Peng Fei hesitated. He asked carefully, Sir, did something happen to you? Or have you gone to the 9 mystical cave heaven to hand me over to the Patriarch? Hearing his strange tone, Ji Tianxing knew there was hope. He explained, I am now the acting leader of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. I am leading an army to attack the mystical cave heaven. Just as we were about to win, the mystical cave heaven invited 2 peak divine kings to help. One of the peak divine kings is your family's ancestor. Ah! Peng Fei was dumbfounded. He was like a petrified statue. Fortunately, he had already stopped cultivating. Otherwise, his divine power would have been in chaos and he would have gone mad. After a long time, he finally recovered from the monstrous shock. But he still could not believe it. He asked with a trembling voice, Sir, you are not joking with me, right? You became the leader of the 10,000 Demon Alliance and led an army to attack the mystical cave heaven? And, you're going to win? Oh my God, what happened to this world? Why did it become so strange and crazy? Ji Tianxing did not give Peng Fei time to calm down and digest the information. He asked, Peng Fei, can you persuade the Golden Rock Patriarch not to get involved in this mess? Don't say you can't do it. If you really can't do it, then I can only fight back and kill him and that divine king war whale together. What? Peng Fei, who still hadn't calmed down, was once again scared out of his wits when he heard this. His entire person was somewhat dazed. Sir, you are also a peak divine king? How is this possible? Why didn't I see it before? Could it be that you have been hiding your strength? In a short time, he was forced to accept too much information. It was too shocking. Peng Fei was already incoherent. Ji Tianxing still did not explain. He said in a calm and dignified tone, the situation is urgent. I don't have time to explain it to you. I will give you 10 breaths of time to think. Can you persuade your patriarch to give up on this matter? 10, 9, 8, 7. Peng Fei panted heavily and forced himself to calm down. When Ji Tianxing shouted 3, he finally made an impulsive decision. Sir, let me try. Chapter 3784. Let you try. Peng Fei's somewhat unconfident voice made Ji Tianxing frown. Now that the two armies are facing each other, the decisive battle is about to start. Moreover, everyone on the battlefield is a God King powerhouse. If you don't have the confidence, then don't take the risk. Although Ji Tianxing wanted Peng Fei to help him take care of Forefather Golden Rock, this powerful enemy, without using force, he did not want to force Peng Fei to do so. However, he didn't want to force Peng Fei to do this in order to avoid bringing disaster to Peng Fei. At most, he would go all out and use all his trump cards and ultimate skills to fight the two great peak God Kings. However, after Peng Fei was silent for a moment, he said in a low and complicated tone, I should still have 60 to 70% confidence. After all, I'm a direct descendant of the forefather. According to seniority, he's my grandfather's great-grandfather. Without a doubt, now that things had developed to this extent, Peng Fei finally revealed the truth. This was his identity secret. It had never been exposed before. Ji Tianxing was also full of surprise. He said with a light smile, Haha, I already guessed that you shouldn't be an ordinary Golden Rock descendant. I didn't expect it to be so. In that case, the Golden Rock race's current patriarch is your grandfather? Peng Fei's emotions were somewhat complicated. He answered in a muffled voice. It was unknown what he was worried about. Ji Tianxing comforted him. Don't worry too much. I have some relationship with your forefather. He already protected me in front of everyone just now. However, just protecting him a little is not enough. I have to remove him from this matter. Now, it's up to your performance. Finishing, he opened the spatial passage to the divine pagoda. Peng Fei's thoughts were still somewhat chaotic. Before he could adjust his mood and state, he was sent into the sky and exposed to everyone's attention. Swoosh. Peng Fei, dressed in a golden robe, appeared beside Ji Tianxing with a bitter and complicated expression. He instantly became everyone's focus. King War Dragon, Forefather Golden Rock, and Divine King War Whale all stared at Ji Tianxing. More than 10,000 people on the battlefield were also waiting for his decision to surrender or resist. But right at this moment, a golden-robed young man suddenly appeared beside him. Many people originally thought that this was Ji Tianxing's trump card, and that it was definitely a peak God King powerhouse. When everyone saw through that Peng Fei only had peak Divine Lord strength, their faces were immediately full of astonishment. What's going on? What does he mean? Who is that golden-robed youth? Why do I feel that the golden-robed kid's appearance and temperament are a little similar to Patriarch Golden Rock? What does Long Tian want? Do you want to fight or surrender? Give me a quick answer. Many God Kings and thousands of God Lords looked at Ji Tianxing and Peng Fei in confusion. Only Emperor Battle Dragon, Forefather Golden Peng, Divine Emperor Battle Whale, Hu Xinyu, and the others realized something was amiss. This was especially true for Patriarch Golden Rock. Although he appeared calm on the surface, he had already understood something. He frowned slightly and looked meaningfully at Peng Fei. Then, he stared at Ji Tianxing and sent a voice transmission. Little guy, you're a little shameless. You're not as arrogant as before. Ji Tianxing bowed slightly and sent a voice transmission back. Senior, I had no choice. Please forgive me. Patriarch Golden Rock didn't say anything else, but he sighed in his heart. He felt a little bitter. He had already guessed what Peng Fei wanted to do, so he felt helpless. At this moment, Emperor Battle Dragon and Divine Emperor Battle Whale looked at Peng Fei and then at Patriarch Golden Rock. Their eyes flickered as they vaguely guessed something. Divine Emperor Battle Whale was still calm, but Emperor Battle Dragon's eyes were already showing anger. Just as the experts were speaking in riddles and maintaining their silence, while the 10,000 overseer gods were confused, Peng Fei finally spoke. He had also been shocked by such a huge lineup, but he quickly calmed down. He ignored the 10,000 god lords and only stared at Patriarch Golden Rock as he walked over step by step. There was no doubt that 10,000 pairs of eyes were staring at him. Their gazes were filled with doubt, disdain, hatred, and all sorts of other emotions. It made him feel extremely pressured. With every step he took, he felt as if he was walking on a mountain that was tens of thousands of meters tall. After a dozen steps, he was drenched in cold sweat. Even so, he gritted his teeth and walked slowly toward Patriarch Golden Rock. The distance between the two of them was clearly only 100,000 feet, but he had to walk for a full quarter of an hour before arriving. When he stopped in front of Patriarch Golden Rock, he was only 10 steps away. Emperor Battle Dragon and Divine Emperor Battle Whale's invisible aura had already made him tremble. His face was pale. Fortunately, Patriarch Golden Rock secretly released his aura to protect him, helping him to resist the pressure of the two top experts. Disciple Peng Fei greets Patriarch. Peng Fei knelt down solemnly and kowtowed to Patriarch Golden Rock. His posture was extremely respectful. Patriarch Golden Rock looked at him deeply. There was no anger or disappointment in his eyes. Instead, there was a flash of relief. After all, this great-great-grandson of his was only a god lord, but he was able to remain calm in such a situation without losing his composure. It was clear that he was very determined. Yes, he was a talent with potential. He had a successor. What is it? Patriarch Golden Rock nodded slightly and used invisible divine power to help Peng Fei stand up. He asked calmly. Peng Fei bowed and said calmly, Patriarch, a senior once taught me that everything has its ups and downs, and that everything has its ups and downs. Heaven and earth have its Tao, and life and death are all reincarnations. You live in seclusion and only ask the will of the heavens, not the mundane world. Therefore, you leave the affairs of the world to the people of the world. I only wish to accompany you home and continue to listen to the will of the heavens. It was a simple sentence, but it explained the cycle of life and death in the mundane world, as well as the merciless principle of reincarnation. Divine Emperor Battle Whale narrowed his eyes and looked deeply at Peng Fei. Battle Dragon King's expression changed drastically, and he glared sharply at Peng Fei. All of this fell into Patriarch Golden Rock's eyes. Patriarch Golden Rock nodded and glanced at Ji Tianxing. He frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly smiled. Ha ha, the senior you speak of is indeed a great power who has not appeared in the world. He can already understand the will of the heavens, and is likely not far from surpassing the Divine King realm. That senior has seen through everything, and it is this old man who has fallen into a disadvantage. Forget it. This old man is not of the world to begin with, so why should I care about the affairs of the world? The first sentence was directed at Peng Fei, but the last two sentences sounded like he was talking to himself. When he finished, Patriarch Golden Rock smiled in relief. He flung his sleeves and left with Peng Fei. Battle Dragon King and Divine Emperor Battle Whale were left to the side without even a word of explanation. This scene made more than 10,000 people in the field dumbfounded. They were all stunned on the spot. Gone just like that. Of course, no one knew what Patriarch Golden Rock's true thoughts were, or how much of what he said was true. Or perhaps he left without an explanation because he didn't know how to. But all of this, who could prove it? Chapter 3785. Forefather Golden Rock. Wait. Seeing that Forefather Golden Rock had already flown thousands of miles away, Battle Dragon King finally regained his senses and hurriedly chased after him. Forefather Golden Rock paused in midair with Peng Fei and turned to look at Battle Dragon King. Battle Whale, Xueshong, Ji Tianxing, Hu Xinyu, and the others all remained where they were, watching them from afar. Everyone knew that Battle Dragon King had finally found a life-saving straw, a trump card to turn the tables. How could he give it up so easily? However, the crux of the matter was what Battle Dragon King had to say. Battle Dragon King stopped in front of Forefather Golden Rock and frowned. Forefather Golden Rock, I know that you've been in seclusion, focused on cultivating your divine Tao. However, the world is in chaos now, and the traitors of the Myriad Demon Alliance want to wreak havoc on the continent. Since you've already come to Xuanji Grotto Heaven, you should kill these traitors for the sake of His Majesty Dragon Emperor. However, you've just left without a proper explanation. You're not giving His Majesty Dragon Emperor any face. I hope you won't be blinded by these traitors and uphold justice for the world. Although Forefather Golden Rock was a peak divine king, he had always kept a low profile, and his personality was honest and gentle. Battle Dragon King had Xuanji Grotto Heaven as his backer, and his status was noble, so he did not have much respect for Forefather Golden Rock. With such accusations, there was even a hidden threat in his words. His meaning was simple. Forefather Golden Rock had left today, but His Majesty Dragon Emperor would definitely punish him when he returned. 9 Mystical Grotto Heaven would definitely suffer. At first, Forefather Golden Rock had felt guilty. Now that he saw the War Dragon King's unyielding attitude, the guilt in his heart disappeared without a trace. He bowed slightly to the Battle Dragon King and said calmly without any anger, "Battle Dragon King, this old man didn't think it through and accepted your invitation to come here. Now that I've thought it through, I want to leave again. This is indeed this old man's fault. This old man apologizes to you. However, there are some things that I must clarify in front of everyone today. I've stayed away from worldly affairs for 20,000 years, not because I'm afraid of anyone, but because I've always admired the great Tao. I'm willing to come to the Enigma Grotto, not because I'm giving anyone face, but because I don't want to see the common people suffer. I want to use my meager strength to turn things around. But I've thought it through now. Everything in the world has a cycle of cause and effect. The heavenly Tao is fair, and it's absolutely not something that we can interfere with. As for the justice and the country that you speak of, other than the heavenly Tao, who else can represent justice in this world? Neither the Xuanji Grotto nor the Myriad Demon Alliance could represent them. Therefore, this old man has understood and decided to stay out of this matter and allow the will of the heavens to arrange it. I will not go against the will of the heavens." After saying that, the Golden Rock ancestor calmly looked at the Battle Dragon King and asked, "Battle Dragon King, do you understand what I mean?" Everyone present, as long as they weren't idiots, understood. Patriarch Golden Rock just didn't want to meddle in other people's business. As for the talk about justice and the heavenly Tao, it was just to leave some face for everyone. The Enigma Grotto Heaven used to be the overlord of the Star Source continent, representing justice and the country. However, this did not mean that the Xuanji Grotto would always be the overlord, nor would it always be righteous. Everything in the world would rise and fall, and so would the rise and fall of a dynasty. If the Myriad Demon Alliance destroyed the Enigma Grotto and replaced it, then the Myriad Demon Alliance would be righteous and the country. On the other hand, if the Myriad Demon Alliance failed, then they would be rebels, and the Enigma Grotto would still be the overlord. In short, the winner was king and the loser was in the wrong. Whoever won was right. This was the will of the heavens. No one could refute this kind of hooliganism. Moreover, it was easy to understand, and more than 10,000 people present agreed. However, War Dragon King was furious. He pointed at Golden Rock Grand Elder and shouted, "You! What a sharp tongue you have! How dare you distort the truth with your word? Very well, Patriarch Golden Rock. You must remember what you did today, and when His Majesty the Dragon Emperor returns, he will make you regret it." This was already a blatant threat. God King Warwhale, Xueshong, and many other God Kings from the Enigma Grotto were anxious. "Oh, Battle Dragon King, no matter how angry you are, you should hold it in. You can't fall out with the Golden Rock Ancestor. The Golden Rock Ancestor is obviously protecting the Myriad Demon Alliance and Long Tien, and you're threatening him to his face. If he's forced to help the Myriad Demon Alliance, won't we be doomed?" Similar thoughts flashed through the minds of everyone present. The Golden Rock Ancestor was not angry at all. He still looked kind and amiable. However, his slightly stooped body straightened up. His murky golden eyes became clear as he looked at the Battle Dragon King. He said in a dignified tone, "The Golden Rock tribe does not take the initiative to cause trouble, but we are not afraid of it either." After saying that, he ignored the Battle Dragon King and left with Peng Fei. Whoosh! Under everyone's gaze, the grandfather-grandson pair gradually disappeared into the distance. When they were hundreds of thousands of miles away, no one could see them, and not even divine consciousness could detect them. They were not far from the exit of the Enigma Grotto. At this moment, the grandfather-grandson pair saw a large group of figures flying in the sky from the direction of the exit. These figures were as fast as streaks of light. There were more than 30 of them, and they looked like a dark cloud. The Golden Rock ancestor frowned slightly as he glanced at them. He could tell at a glance that they were all godly kings. When he saw their clothes, he realized that they were not from the Enigma Grotto. They seemed to be from the Myriad Demon Alliance. Only then did he relax. The godly kings naturally saw the Golden Rock ancestor and Peng Fei. They were all on high alert, and they gripped their divine weapons tightly. However, 2 of the 3 elders in the lead were injured 9th-layer godly kings. They were the left and right protectors. They sized up the Golden Rock ancestor and Peng Fei, then said something to the godly kings behind them. As a result, the godly kings let down their guard and changed their direction slightly. They brushed past the Golden Rock ancestor and Peng Fei. The 2 sides did not stop, nor did they communicate. Their figures quickly disappeared into the horizon. About half an hour later, the Golden Rock ancestor and Peng Fei arrived at the exit of the Enigma Grotto. At this moment, they saw that the Godstone array near the exit had been destroyed. The area within 10,000 miles was in ruins. In the ruins, they could vaguely see the corpses of the Golden Dragon Guards. There were 10 godly kings from the Myriad Demon Alliance and more than 600 godly monarchs guarding the exit. Peng Fei was taken aback when he saw this. Then, he smiled in relief. He already had an answer in his heart. The outcome of this battle was already decided. The Myriad Demon Alliance was bound to win. When the Golden Rock ancestor and Peng Fei approached the exit, the Myriad Demon Alliance experts guarding the exit immediately became alert. 6 godly kings led dozens of godly monarchs. They held divine weapons and surrounded them warily. Chapter 3786. Before the left and right protectors left, they had ordered them to guard the exit of Xuanji Grotto Heaven. They were not to let anyone enter or leave. If anyone from Xuanji Grotto Heaven approached, they were to kill them. However, old ancestor Golden Rock and Peng Fei approached him openly without any strange expressions. Their clothes were neat and tidy, and there were no signs of battle. They did not seem to be from Xuanji Grotto Heaven. The godly kings could not make up their minds. They decided to ask about their identities first before attacking. Fortunately, Peng Fei was quick-witted. Seeing that everyone was on guard, he took the initiative to speak. Brothers from the Myriad Demon Alliance, I am Peng Fei, young Master Long Tian's friend. This person beside me is the Master of 9 Mystical Grotto Heaven, the forefather of our Golden Rock clan. We are friends, not enemies. Don't be nervous. Hearing his explanation, the godly kings secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They did not completely believe Peng Fei, but they relaxed and bowed with a smile. After bowing, the leading godly king said respectfully, "So it's forefather Golden Rock and young Master Peng Fei. We have been disrespectful. Greetings, forefather Golden Rock. Please forgive us, senior. We have a mission and orders, so we need you to prove your identity. We will ask for instructions from our superiors." Forefather Golden Rock was still amiable. He did not say much. He only raised his hand and released a beam of golden light. Whoosh! The sacred golden light in his hand immediately condensed into the image of a golden-winged rock. It was lifelike and had unparalleled divine might. A powerful and sacred aura belonging to a peak godly king immediately spread out. Around forefather Golden Rock, hundreds of Daoist rhymes and divine runes of lore danced. It was terrifying. The leading middle-aged godly king was a 7th-degree godly king. He was naturally knowledgeable. Based on forefather Golden Rock's move, he could confirm that forefather Golden Rock was definitely a peak godly king. In the entire Starsource continent, the number of known peak godly kings could be counted on one hand. Without a doubt, even if this kind-looking golden-haired elder was not forefather Golden Rock, he was an expert that the Myriad Demon Alliance did not want to offend. Thus, the middle-aged God King hurriedly bowed and apologized, and sent a message to the left and right protectors for instructions. Not long after, the left and right protectors sent a reply, ordering them to let them pass. The God Kings did not dare to delay. After apologizing to forefather Golden Rock, they hurriedly opened the exit. Old Ancestor Golden Rock nodded slightly and hurriedly left Xuanji Grotto with Peng Fei. Shua. With a flash of white light, Patriarch Golden Rock and Peng Fei appeared at the peak of Sky Crane Mountain, standing above the sea of clouds. There was not a single soul in the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. It was very quiet. Patriarch Golden Rock was not in a hurry to leave. He turned his head to look at Peng Fei beside him with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Peng Fei, how did you get to know Long Tien? Patriarch Golden Rock had always felt that this matter was very strange. Could this be the will of the heavens? Or perhaps, Long Tien's scheming mind was deep, and he had long predicted today's situation, so he tried his best to get close to Peng Fei. Peng Fei was very smart. Looking at the ancestor's reaction, he guessed that the ancestor had some suspicions. Thus, he hurriedly recounted the process of him and Long Tien getting to know each other in detail. After hearing this, Patriarch Golden Rock was relieved and said with some emotion, "It seems that this is really the will of the heavens." Peng Fei also nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "What the ancestor did today is also in accordance with the will of the heavens. Our clan will definitely be blessed in the future." Patriarch Golden Rock raised his eyebrows and said with interest, "Oh? What do you mean?" Peng Fei did not hide and said with a smile, "Ancestor, Long Tien once told me that he promised in the name of the Heavenly Dragon Emperor that if the Myriad Demon Alliance controls the Star Source continent, as long as the 9 Mystical Grotto does not rebel in the future, he will protect the 9 Mystical Grotto forever." Patriarch Golden Rock was stunned for a moment, and a trace of gentleness flashed in his eyes. On account of the Heavenly Dragon Emperor's kindness, he let the Myriad Demon Alliance off today. And Long Tien was grateful for this favor and also made a promise to the 9 Mystical Grotto. This was what it meant to return the favor. Compared to the arrogant War Dragon King, who knew how much better he was. Then, Patriarch Golden Rock smiled and said earnestly to Peng Fei, "You have to remember that it is important to be kind to others and form good karma. But if you want to be worry-free, you have to rely on yourself." Peng Fei hurriedly nodded and said with a smile, "I will remember the ancestors' teachings." Patriarch Golden Rock thought for a moment and said with a playful tone, "I am going to return to the 9 Mystical Grotto now. Do you want to go back with me or stay here and wait for Long Tien?" "Ah!" Peng Fei's eyes widened in surprise and disbelief. Originally, he had planned to follow the ancestor back to the 9 Mystical Grotto today. Although he would lose his freedom and become a bird in a cage again, he was satisfied to be able to help Long Tien so much. But now, the ancestor had guessed his thoughts and allowed him to not return to the 9 Mystical Grotto. This simply made him overjoyed and excited. "Ancestor, can I really not go back?" Peng Fei asked with a heart full of surprise. Patriarch Golden Rock smiled kindly and said calmly, "Actually, not long after you ran away from home, I found out. You felt wronged in your heart, or you wanted to change your illusion realm and cultivation method. These are all fine. I can understand, and I am also willing to see some of the disciples in the clan have their own thoughts and changes. Instead of blindly following the past and blindly believing in the experiences of the seniors, you lose your own considerations." Patriarch Golden Rock's tone was very kind, and he even had a gratified smile. When Peng Fei heard this, it was as if there was a thunderclap in his head. He was stunned. He was stunned on the spot and only came back to his senses after a long time. His eyes were slightly red, and he almost cried. Back then, he had run away from home and almost betrayed the Golden Rock clan, but he was not punished by the clan. Not only was he not caught and brought back to the 9 Mystical Grotto for trial, the clan even used their connections to ask 2 godly king experts to secretly take care of him. He did not understand the reason and thought that the clan leader's grandfather had found his conscience and deliberately arranged this. Now, he understood that the ancestor had paid attention to this matter and tacitly approved of his decision. "Ancestor, thank." Peng Fei endured the bitterness in his heart and was about to bow and thank the ancestor. Patriarch Golden Rock waved his hand and continued, "Don't blame your grandfather. He is the clan leader and shouldered the safety and future of 20,000 people. He has no choice. Also, don't belittle yourself and lose confidence. Cultivating the divine way is not something that can be determined in 100 or 1,000 years. Since ancient times, Who knows how many godly king experts have been mediocre in the first half of their lives, only to shine in the end. Therefore, don't be concerned about your current strengths and weaknesses. You need to stick to your heart, learn to think, and find the divine way that suits you. At this point, Patriarch Golden Rock put his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. His voice was deep and distant. I have always believed that every child is like a star in the sky. They all have their own shining light. Chapter 3787. Inside the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. Near the dilapidated Golden Dragon mountain range, more than 10,000 godlords were engaged in a fierce battle. After Patriarch Golden Rock left, the furious War Dragon King ordered the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven to kill the myriad Demon League. He was so anxious because he was afraid of Ji Tianxing's thoughts and methods. Originally, they were in a good situation, but they didn't expect Ji Tianxing to come up with a disciple of the Golden Rock clan and trick the Golden Rock old ancestor away with just a few words. War Dragon King was anxious and angry that he had lost a strong ally. He was afraid that if he delayed any longer, Ji Tianxing wouldn't surrender and would use some tricks to trick God King Battle Whale. God King Battle Whale should be more loyal to the Xuanji Grotto Heaven than Patriarch Golden Rock. However, War Dragon King couldn't guarantee that God King Battle Whale wouldn't change his mind at such a critical moment. What if Ji Tianxing used some tricks to form an alliance with God King Battle Whale and split the world? That would be a tragedy for the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. To avoid any complications, War Dragon King decided to end the battle quickly. Therefore, more than 70 God Kings led more than 10,000 Divine Lords to attack the 6,000 members of the Myriad Demon League. Under War Dragon King's arrangement, God King Battle Whale fought the strongest member of the Myriad Demon League, acting leader Long Tian. He and Xue Shong worked together to deal with the elders of the Myriad Demon League. A dozen Golden Dragon Guard commanders surrounded the Myriad Demon League's branch leaders and heavenly kings. The 16,000-plus Divine Lord experts from both sides were also divided into two battlefields and engaged in a fierce battle in the sky. Everyone knew that this was the final battle. The outcome of this battle would determine each other's fate and who would become the overlord of the Starsource continent. Would they reach the peak of glory and control the Starsource continent? Or would they be beaten into the dust and become the humiliating loser? It all depended on the outcome of this battle. Therefore, no one held back anymore. They used all their divine powers and ultimate skills and fought bravely. Endless light and shadows of divine spells filled the area within a radius of 50,000 miles, causing the entire area to be in chaos. Amidst the dazzling divine light, earth-shattering explosions erupted one after another, shaking the universe. Violent shockwaves that carried fragments of divine light, pieces of flesh, corpses, and the remains of divine artifacts swept across the battlefield and scattered in the ruins that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. Every minute and every second, many Divine Lord Masters were killed. Their heads were separated from their bodies, their bones shattered, or they were turned into a rain of blood. Angry roars, hysterical shouts, and shrill screams could be heard all over the place. This battlefield had already transformed into the most ferocious and bloody battlefield. But what was most terrifying was not the battlefield of the Divine Lord experts, but the battlefield of the top experts. High up in the sky, Battle Dragon King and Xue Shong had joined forces to fight Hu Xinyu, Ao Jinying, Bai Feng, and the others. The shockwaves from the battle tore the sky apart, revealing cracks in the void. The War Dragon King was heavily injured and weak. He was only in charge of assisting and protecting himself. The main attacker was naturally Blood Death. With the protection of the indestructible golden body, he attacked Hu Xinyu, Ao Jinying, Bai Feng, and the others aggressively and had the absolute advantage. Before ancestral Patriarch Golden Rock and Supreme Being Battle Whale appeared, he was still a little hesitant and wavering. But after the two top Divine Kings appeared, he made up his mind and stood firm. So, at this moment, he was extremely brave and domineering, beating Hu Xinyu, Bai Feng, and the others badly. On the other side, 80,000 miles away from the battlefield, Ji Tianxing and Supreme Being Battle Whale were fighting fiercely high up in the sky. As the most powerful cultivators of both forces, they were of course the key to the outcome of this battle. Both of them did not hold back and used their full strength, using all kinds of trump cards and ultimate skills. The war whale deity king revealed his true form, which was 100 miles long black war whale. His entire body was shrouded in icy blue light. It opened its mouth wide and spat out waves of divine light. The divine light transformed into thousands of divine light shadows and blasted towards Ji Tianxing. He also released invisible law divine runes and a weak Daoist rhyme to seal off a radius of 50,000 miles, suppressing Ji Tianxing. The so-called Daoist rhyme was the power of the heavenly way that a peak divine king could comprehend the heavenly way. The end of the cultivation of the divine way was to merge with the heavenly way, comprehend and control the power of the heavenly way. If a peak divine king could completely control the complete heavenly way law and the power of the heavenly way, he would surpass the divine king realm and take the final step to enter the God Emperor realm. A peak divine king who had mastered the Daoist rhyme had a natural advantage over a divine king like Ji Tianxing who had not mastered the Daoist rhyme. Fortunately, Supreme Being Battle Whale had only cultivated for a short time and had only been a peak divine king for a few hundred years. Compared to an old monster like ancestral patriarch Golden Rock, his Daoist rhyme was obviously much weaker. Even if his Daoist rhyme could suppress Ji Tianxing, it was not fatal and could not achieve the effect of crushing. After all, Ji Tianxing was also a peak divine king who had mastered the Daoist rhyme in his previous life. Back then, Kenshin's comprehension of the heavenly way was deeper than Supreme Being Battle Whale's. The Daoist rhyme that he had mastered was much thicker than Supreme Being Battle Whale's. Ji Tianxing had enough experience to know how to avoid Supreme Being Battle Whale's Daoist rhyme and weaken the suppression of the Daoist rhyme to the greatest extent. Moreover, he had the primordial chaos bell in his hands. Under his control, the primordial chaos bell transformed and reformed into a pitch-black armor that wrapped around his body and protected him firmly. The divine bell even released a majestic power of law to resist Supreme Being Battle Whale's suppression and sealed off the area within a radius of 50,000 miles. On this battlefield, he was suppressed by Supreme Being Battle Whale and could not teleport. However, Supreme Being Battle Whale was also suppressed by the divine bell and could not use spatial transference. Therefore, the battle between the two of them was exceptionally fierce and desperate. It was almost a head-on clash that was difficult to dodge and avoid. Although Supreme Being Battle Whale was stronger and had mastered the Daoist rhyme, he did not have a supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing was slightly weaker, but he had a lot of experience and had the primordial chaos bell. The two of them exchanged over 1,000 moves high up in the sky, but there was no clear victor. Each of them had their own merits. However, God King Warhail's mind was calm and collected. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, looked solemn and anxious. Supreme Being Battle Whale could stall for time, but he could not. He had to end the battle as soon as possible. This was because Xuanji Grotto Heaven had the upper hand and was suppressing the Myriad Demon Alliance. The number of people on both sides was decreasing, but the Myriad Demon Alliance's casualties were more severe. If they delayed for another hour, the Myriad Demon Alliance would definitely lose. At this point, Xuanji Grotto Heaven had more than 8,000 people left, while the Myriad Demon Alliance only had about 4,000 people left. From Hu Xinyu and Ao Jinying to a few thousand divine lords, they were all filled with grief and despair. Fortunately, just as the two sides were fighting fiercely, a dark cloud flashing with divine light rushed over from afar and joined the battle. That dark cloud was formed by more than 30 Supreme Being experts. The three leading elders were the left and right protectors and the chief of internal affairs. The reinforcements of the Myriad Demon Alliance had finally arrived. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3788. The left and right protectors and the head of internal affairs, Fu Ergu, led more than 30 God King experts into the battlefield. Without needing anyone to give them orders, they split into two groups and joined the two teams from the Demon League. Although the number of reinforcements was small, there were only about 30 of them. But they were all God King experts and could fight against 100 people. When they joined the battle, the situation changed immediately. Divine light flashed across the sky. Divine light covered the sky and poured down on the people from the Xuanji Grotto. In less than 100 breaths, More than 1,000 monarch god experts died under the swords of the god king experts. The Demon League's army that was retreating immediately regained their footing and had a chance to catch their breath. The Xuanji Grotto's army that was in high spirits had their attacks stopped and their arrogance quickly weakened. The situation quickly became balanced and the two sides were evenly matched. Especially Hu Xinyu, Ao Jinying and a few elders, they had been suppressed by Xueshong and War Dragon King and were on the verge of collapse and death. Now that the head of internal affairs had joined the battle, the pressure on them was greatly reduced. Everyone finally had a chance to catch their breath and quickly took the chance to consume some divine pills to suppress their injuries and recover their divine power. The head of internal affairs, Fu Ergu, had always kept a low profile and very few people had seen him fight. For the past few hundred years, he had been in the Demon City, controlling the internal affairs of the Demon League and handling all kinds of important matters. There was a rumor in the Demon City that he was the second strongest expert in the Demon League and his strength was second only to League Master Luo Hu. He was stronger than the left and right protectors. But this rumor had not been confirmed and many people were skeptical. Until now, when everyone saw him fighting Xueshong and suppressing War Dragon King, they finally believed the rumor. Fu Ergu's super strong combat power was not that of an ordinary Ninth Heaven Realm God King but an expert that was very close to the peak God King realm. If it was not for Xueshong's immortal golden body, he would not be Fu Ergu's opponent in his weakened state. Even so, Fu Ergu was still able to fight Xueshong to a draw and suppress War Dragon King, forcing him to retreat continuously. Therefore, the thousands of soldiers from the Demon League respected Fu Ergu even more. Everyone was more confident in the victory of this battle. Hu Xinyu and Ao Jinying retreated to the edge of the battlefield. After consuming the divine pills, they circulated their energy and discussed with each other. Previously, when the two protectors said that our reinforcements had arrived, young master asked them to receive them. I didn't believe them. At that time, I was still thinking that we were already at the end of our rope. Where would we find reinforcements? I didn't expect the reinforcements to be Sir. That's right. This is simply too unexpected, even we didn't expect it. But weren't Lord Steward and those consecrators, hall masters, and branch masters under orders to guard the headquarters of Myriad Demon City? Why would they leave the Demon City and come to the Xuanji Grotto to help? Of them. If they all left, wouldn't the current 1,000 Demon City be an empty city? That's of. Our demons of heaven's sects Erofes of Lords sect reinforcements, of Lords. This reign reinforcements, this Lord of Lord. Since it's young master's arrangement, he must be confident. Ao Jinying frowned and thought for a while. Then, he smiled and nodded in agreement. That's right. Previously, Lord asked the head to guard the Demon League to prevent an attack from Xuanji Grotto, in case our headquarters is destroyed. But now, we've entered Xuanji Grotto and destroyed the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's divine palace. I guess Xuanji Grotto doesn't have any more trump cards and forces to attack the Demon League. Since the Demon League is safe, of course the head and his colleagues have to come to Xuanji Grotto to help. Only then can our league win. It will take at least 2 to 3 days to reach Xuanji Grotto from the Demon League. In that case, young master had already predicted this outcome and informed Sir Supervisor in advance. So, everything is within Lord's expectations. Lord's foresight is amazing. I'm impressed. Hu Xinyu and Ao Jinying were both smart people. After a short discussion, they guessed the whole story and understood the reason behind it. Because of this, they admired and respected Ji Tianxing even more. After a while, their injuries stabilized and their divine power recovered. They were about to return to the battlefield and attack Xueshong and the War Dragon King. But the head of internal affairs, Fu Ergu, ordered, "Don't come. Leave these two to me. You two go and help everyone kill the Xuanji Grotto's soldiers as soon as possible." Hu Xinyu and Ao Jinying thought for a while and quickly replied, "Yes, Lord." Then, the two of them charged into the battlefield, killing the Golden Dragon Guards and Sir God experts. They were well aware that the Chief of Internal Affairs' words were very reasonable. Even if they joined forces with the head of Internal Affairs to attack the War Dragon King and Xueshong, it would not be of much use. It would be better to let the head of internal affairs hold back the War Dragon King and Shueshong while they went to kill the Golden Dragon Guards and Sir Gods of Xuanji Grotto. This would be more helpful to the battle. The facts proved that the Demon League's strategy was correct. While the War Dragon King and Shueshong were held back by the head of internal affairs, the Demon League had more God Kings than the Xuanji Grotto. On the two battlefields, the Demon League quickly gained the upper hand and completely suppressed the Xuanji Grotto. As time passed, the Xuanji Grotto's God Kings dwindled and their Sir God experts were slaughtered. An hour later, the Xuanji Grotto's Sir God experts were only left with about 3,000. 2 hours later, the Xuanji Grotto's side was left with about 1,000 people and about 20 God Kings. On the other hand, the Demon League still had about 50 God Kings and 3,000 Sir God experts. Now that the situation had developed to this point, the Xuanji Grotto's defeat was inevitable. Moreover, the head of internal affairs had sacrificed 500 years of his cultivation to kill the War Dragon King despite being heavily injured. The Xuanji Grotto's top experts were only left with God King War Whale and Shueshong. Both of them were foreign aid and not the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's direct subordinates. Therefore, the Xuanji Grotto's people were like dragons without a leader and their morale plummeted. The thousands of Sir Gods and over 20 godly kings who were lucky enough to survive also lost their fighting spirit and drive. Many of them fought as they retreated, looking for an opportunity to escape. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the others led the Demon League's 3,000 experts and decisively formed an encirclement, swearing to kill the enemy. Seeing this scene, Shueshong, who was already exhausted, gradually lost his fighting spirit. He stopped fighting the head of internal affairs and started to think about escaping. After all, the Xuanji Grotto's momentum was already gone. He was not the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's direct descendant, so there was no need for him to die with the Xuanji Grotto. Chapter 3789. Although God King War Whale and Ji Tianxing's battlefield was 80,000 miles away. The two had fought for almost 2 hours, but there was no clear victor. However, the two were secretly watching the battle between the thousands of soldiers, and they were anxious. At the beginning, the Myriad Demon Alliance was at a disadvantage. Ji Tianxing was worried, but God King War Whale was calm. Later, the Minister of Internal Affairs brought more than 30 God Kings into the battlefield, and the situation began to change. Ji Tianxing's mental state became much more relaxed, while God King War Whale began to worry. Now that the two saw the mystical grotto's army crumble, and the Myriad Demon Alliance's people were attacking with all their might, their mentality changed again. Ji Tianxing's heart calmed down. Aside from the fact that victory was within his grasp, he was still planning how to defeat Deity King War Whale. After all, this was the first peak God King he had fought in his life. If he could not defeat him, it would be a pity. When God King War Whale saw the mystical grotto's army crumble, and even Shueshong began to flee, his expression dimmed. Of course, he could see that the mystical grotto's momentum was gone, and they were destined to lose today's battle. With his status, he did not need to be buried with the mystical grotto. However, others could disregard their image and flee, but he could not. After all, he was a peak God King, one of the strongest people on this continent. If he fled like Shueshong, wouldn't he lose face and become a laughingstock? How would he, a peak God King, have any dignity and glory? However, God King War Whale was even more aware that since the situation had developed to this point, he was powerless to reverse the situation. Therefore, he could only think silently. How could he withdraw from this battle without losing face? This was a difficult question. God King War Whale thought of many ways, but after some consideration, he could only give up. He admitted that Long Tian was very strong, and there was no point in continuing the battle. Why not just return home and call it a day? This would weaken the momentum of a peak God King, and make him look guilty and timid. Saying, "I suddenly remembered that I have something important to do, so I'll take my leave first." That was too childish. Even a fool would not believe it. Moreover, this method of leaving was similar to running away in a sorry state. Was he supposed to say that the fate of the Xuanji Grotto was already decided? He wasn't a subordinate of the Xuanji Grotto, and he had already done his best. Since the situation is irreversible, I don't want to make a deadly enemy of the 10,000 demon alliance. If this news were to spread, it would definitely cause a huge uproar in the continent. At that time, not only would he be despised by everyone, but he would also offend the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor. This method was also undesirable. Divine King War Whale pondered for a moment, then suddenly remembered the excuse old ancestor Golden Rock used to leave. The Enigma Paradise used to be the ruler of this continent, but now it's going to fall at the hands of the Myriad Demon Alliance. Is this the will of the heavens? Sigh. Heaven's will is truly unfathomable. This king possesses the will of heaven, so naturally, I do not dare to go against heaven's will. Forget it, everything in the world is predestined. This king's retreat is also in accordance with the will of the heavens. As this thought flashed through his mind, God King War Whale's eyes lit up. He felt that this method was feasible. In any case, Patriarch Golden Rock had used this move before, so he did not feel that it was embarrassing. It should not be a problem for him to borrow it, right? However, after much consideration, God King War Whale decided to use this method as a backup plan. What he desired the most, what he thought was the most perfect and most reasonable plan, should be Long Tien taking the initiative to ask. God King War Whale, look, the Enigma Paradise has lost, and everyone has fled. Why haven't you retreated? Although the world knows that you're righteous and warm-hearted, and this king also admires you for being so righteous and powerful, there's no point in fighting. If we continue to fight, there's no point in us fighting. Why don't we stop fighting? Please leave the Enigma Paradise and stop interfering in this matter. Take it that the Myriad Demon Alliance owes you a favor. Long Tien looked at him with a sincere expression and spoke in a sincere tone. He even bowed to express his sincerity. Then, he put on a pained and helpless expression, sighed a few times, and reluctantly agreed. This was a reasonable and perfect solution. In fact, God King War Whale thought that even if the Myriad Demon Alliance did not owe him a favor, he would still agree. Unfortunately, things did not go as he wished. The reality was as follows: seeing the Enigma Paradise's soldiers being defeated and Xue Shong fleeing for his life, Long Tien smiled coldly. He was no longer worried and anxious. Instead, he focused on dealing with God King War Whale. Not only did he use his full strength, but he also used his trump card. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. Long Tien roared. Golden light flashed all over his body, and he suddenly turned into a giant in golden armor. Not only did his body become extremely large, but his combat strength also increased by 7 times. He was like a giant god. The primordial chaos bell flew high into the sky and quickly expanded to a radius of 30,000 miles. It covered the sky and covered the earth, suppressing God King War Whale. At the same time, Long Tien held the Sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and slashed out with a dazzling golden light that could split heaven and earth. Sword of Apocalypse. Without a doubt, this was Ji Tianqing's strongest state and strongest killing move. In order to defeat God King War Whale, he held nothing back. God King War Whale's expression changed. Under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, his body bent, his strength weakened, and his speed slowed. He could not dodge the sword that could split heaven and earth slashed down. Boom. Crack. The Sword of Apocalypse, tens of thousands of feet long, slashed through the Enigma Paradise's spatial barrier and tore open a huge spatial rift in the sky. Outside the spatial rift, one could clearly see the dark and cold void and the dense starlight. God King War Whale knew that he could not dodge the sword. If he took it head-on, he would definitely be injured. In this critical moment, he calmly made a decision. Swoosh. With a swipe of his huge tail, he tore open a spatial rift in the sky. Then, he turned his head and passed through the spatial rift, entering the outer realm. This move seemed simple, but it required an extremely powerful divine power. One's control and understanding of divine Tao nomological laws had to be at an extremely high level as well. If one was not a peak god king, it was impossible to escape the primordial chaos bell's suppression. Once he entered the dark and cold void, God King War Whale felt the pressure decrease, and his body became lighter. He did not stop. Like a fish in water, he flew into the depths of the void at the speed of light. As a peak god king, he often roamed the void. Therefore, There was no danger for him to escape into the outer realm. Boom! Crack! The sword of Apocalypse, tens of thousands of feet long, missed its target and slashed into the ground. Coincidentally, below was the peak of the Golden Dragon mountain range. It was immediately slashed into a ravine, and half of the mountain range turned into ruins. A terrifying power of laws exploded, destroying everything within a radius of 50,000 miles, turning it into a dark void. The Enigma paradise was shattered. Countless void storms and turbulence passed through the spatial rifts and surged into the Enigma paradise, wreaking havoc. Chapter 3790. The dimensional barrier was broken and the dimensional turbulence and storms entered the Xuanji Grotto heaven. It was absolutely destructive. Hundreds of black hurricanes swept across the Xuanji Grotto heaven and quickly spread. Wherever the hurricane swept past, space would shatter, mountains, rivers, and other things would all turn into nothingness. In just a few breaths of time, the already dilapidated Golden Dragon mountain range was completely destroyed. Not to mention the dilapidated hillsides and mounds of earth, not even a few handfuls of yellow earth remained. Everything had turned into nothingness. The soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance and the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto heaven who were running away saw this with their own eyes. They were terrified and they sped up to escape. Unfortunately, the speed of the dimensional storms was much faster than those divine emperors. In less than 20 breaths, the rapidly expanding dimensional rifts and hundreds of dimensional storms would swallow the thousands of divine emperors. The terrifying dimensional storms would indiscriminately crush and swallow everything. Ji Tianxing originally wanted to chase into the dimensional rifts and kill Divine King Warwhale. But when he saw this, he had to take out the chaotic primordial bell to stop the dimensional rifts and dimensional storms from spreading. He had no choice. The 3,000 soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance had to be saved. Otherwise, even if the 10,000 Demon Alliance defeated the Xuanji Grotto heaven, they would be wiped out. In the end, the dominion of the Star Source continent would still be taken away by other forces. Swish! Under Ji Tianxing's control, the chaotic primordial bell quickly expanded and became 100,000 miles wide in the blink of an eye. Such a huge divine bell was equivalent to a sky canopy. The divine bell fell from the sky and not only covered the rapidly expanding dimensional rifts, but also the hundreds of dimensional storms. There were continuous sounds of bang 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 and rustling coming from the divine bell. The gigantic divine bell also trembled violently as it kept flashing with 5-colored divine light. Apparently, the dimensional storms were attacking and cutting the divine bell. But the divine bell was an ancient divine weapon and it contained a hint of the Tao. It stopped the expanding dimensional rifts and suppressed the terrifying dimensional storms. The crisis of the Xuanji Grotto heaven was quickly resolved and the thousands of divine emperors who were running away were also out of danger. Everyone looked at the god clock in shock, as if they had just survived a calamity. However, the calm only lasted for a few breaths. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyu, and the rest of them soon led the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance to encircle and annihilate the remaining survivors. The 1,000 or so remaining soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto were unable to put up any resistance. Soon, they were completely defeated. 60% of them were Golden Dragon guards. They were loyal to the Xuanji Grotto. Even if they knew they were going to die, they would fight until the very last moment. However, the remaining 40% of godly monarchs and a few godly kings were not from the Xuanji Grotto. Some came from sects and forces under the mysterious grotto, while others came from other realms. Knowing that they would definitely die if they resisted, these people lost their will to fight and simply surrendered. After all, their loyalty to the Xuanji Grotto was built on benefits. Since the Xuanji Grotto was powerful enough, they naturally had to show their loyalty. Now that the Xuanji Grotto was doomed to be destroyed, they had to find a way out for themselves. Thus, the battle ended very quickly. After the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance killed more than 500 gold dragon guards, they began to clean the battlefield and deal with the 400 captives. On the other side, Ji Tianxing used the primordial chaos bell to block the void storm. Then, he chased into the void with his sword. After escaping into the void, God King Warwhale charged into the depths of the void without looking back. However, After flying for tens of thousands of miles, he realized that Long Tien was not chasing after him. He could not help but use his divine consciousness to check. Seeing the void storm wreaking havoc in the Xuanji grotto, he was relieved. Because he knew that Long Tien would definitely stop the space from shattering and stop the raging void storm. First, Long Tien would not allow the 3,000 soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance to be killed by the void storm. If that happened, the 10,000 Demon Alliance would be destroyed. Second, Long Tien would not allow the Xuanji grotto to be destroyed. The 10,000 Demon Alliance still wanted to occupy the grotto and control the entire continent. Therefore, God King War Whale was certain that Long Tien would be killed by the void storm. His nervous heart immediately relaxed. However, just as he relaxed his nervous mood, his heart instantly rose again. This was because his divine consciousness had detected that Long Tien had already passed through the void rift and chased into the void with his sword. What was even more infuriating was that the moment that guy entered the void, it was as if he became a different person. He was even more like a fish in water than him. Whoosh! His speed actually doubled. Furthermore, he was incomparably adapted to the void's environment without any discomfort. Regardless of whether it was the terrifying cold air or the turbulence, traps, and storms lurking in the darkness, he could avoid them all in advance. That feeling was like the void was his home. In just an instant, the distance between the two people closed from 100,000 miles to 50,000 miles. In another 10 breaths of time, he would be caught by Long Tien. God King War Whale was shocked and enraged. He could not resist cursing in his heart, despicable bastard. Actually unwilling to give up, swearing to have a showdown with this king. This king is not someone from the Xuanji grotto. I just came to help out on account of our relationship. Now that things have come to this king already took the initiative to retreat. How can he be so insensible? If he really forced this king into a corner and fought it out with him until both sides suffered heavy losses, is this the result that he wants to see? The way God King War Whale saw it, top powerhouses were not just powerful, they also had to be shrewd enough, adept at weighing the pros and cons, proficient in scheming. If he were Long Tien, he definitely would not pursue under this sort of circumstances. As the saying went, leave a way out for a demon so that we can meet again in the future. Giving each other a way out today, they could still turn enemies into friends in the future. Wasn't this a skill that every big shot should master? Yet, encountering Long Tien this stubborn, it was also unlucky enough. While feeling gloomy in his heart was gloomy, God King War Whale still did not dare to lower his guard, flying with all his might. However, after the two people chased for several 100,000 miles, Ji Tianxing still caught up to him. Swoosh! Wielding the sword of burial of heaven, Ji Tianxing used some kind of divine ability and actually teleported 1,000 miles in the void, blocking in front of God King War Whale. God King War Whale was immediately filled with shock, staring at Ji Tianxing with dumbfounded eyes and slack jaws. What kind of divine ability is this, to actually be able to teleport in the void? If not for the fact that he had some respect for the heavenly Tao in his heart, God King War Whale really wanted to curse out loud. Damned heavens, you cheated for this guy, right? There's no justice in this world. Ji Tianxing raised his brows, looked at God King War Whale, and said in a playful tone, very curious. Do you want to learn? God King War Whale withdrew his war whale body, transforming into a 30-foot tall human form, frowning and looking at him silently. He had a hunch that this was absolutely not something good. Indeed. Ji Tianxing said with a smile, a long time ago, I had a companion, a blue kuan. I originally planned to raise it and make it my mount. But unfortunately, it died in a great battle. And now, I want to fulfill that dream. Although you're not a kuan, just a war whale, I can reluctantly accept it. Chapter 3791. God King War Whale was stunned. Anger began to build up on his face and his eyes turned cold. He didn't know how many years it had been, but this was the first time he heard that someone actually dared to say such words to his face. The creatures of the dragon realm were mostly beasts, ferocious beasts, and divine beasts. Their concept was different from that of the divinity. They rarely thought of mounts or pets. For a powerful warrior like God King War Whale, being treated as a mount was a great insult. He glared at Ji Tianxing and said in a low and cold voice, "Long Tian, do you really want to force me? I didn't step back because I was afraid of you. I just didn't want to die with Xuanji Grotto. I didn't want to become enemies with the Myriad Beast Alliance. If you insist on going your own way, don't blame me for not showing mercy." Even though godly Emperor Battle Whale was too ashamed to speak his mind in the Xuanji Wonderland, Qin Nan did not dare to speak his mind. But now that things had progressed to this point and only he and Ji Tianxing were in the void, that was all he could say. Ji Tianxing knew what God King War Whale was thinking and knew that he wasn't lying. But he wasn't going to back down, nor was he going to let God King War Whale go. Haha. Then why didn't you think of this when you accepted God King War Dragon's invitation to help Xuanji Grotto? Isn't it too late to say this now? Then what do you want? God King War Whale frowned, killing intent surging in his eyes. Ji Tianxing's attitude was still unyielding. He sneered and said, "Everyone has to be responsible for their own actions, and they should pay the price for their mistakes. As a powerful God King, don't tell me you don't understand this." God King War Whale's face darkened even more, but he still sneered confidently. "Even so, you can't do anything to me, much less kill me." The two had fought for 2 hours and exchanged more than 10,000 blows. This was proven. Ji Tianxing didn't think so. "That's right, I can't kill you. But I can severely injure you, teach you an unforgettable lesson, and make you behave for a few decades." Now that the Myriad Demon Alliance had conquered the Xuanji Grotto, they would gradually take over the Star Source continent in the next few decades. During this period, the Myriad Demon Alliance had to guard against the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor's revenge and the Battle Whale God King's rebellion. Ji Tianxing did not want to see any accidents during the 10,000 Demon Alliance's unification of the Star Source continent. Therefore, he felt that severely injuring God King War Whale and forcing him to go into seclusion to recuperate for a few decades was the safest way. God King Warwhale's expression darkened as he thought about it. When he realized this, he couldn't help but grow even more furious. "Very good. Long Tian, you are indeed confident and arrogant. Then this king would like to see what other tricks and trump cards you have that you dare to boast so shamelessly." With that, God King War Whale took out a dark golden halberd that was 6 meters long. The long handle of the halberd was as thick as an arm. Its design was exquisite, simple, and majestic. The halberd at the top was split into 3 halberds, each with a 2-edged blade that flickered with a faint blue divine light. This was God King War Whale's natal divine artifact, the sea-splitting halberd. Of course, this was only a high-grade king-grade divine artifact. God King War Whale's greatest regret was that he didn't have a single supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact. If not, he wouldn't be ranked last among the 4 peak god kings of the Star Source continent. "Die, Long Tian!" God King War Whale roared with a murderous aura. He held the sea-splitting halberd with both hands and charged at Ji Tianxing domineeringly. His entire body emitted a faint blue divine light that condensed into a pair of huge wings. They could help him maneuver in the void and protect him at critical moments. With a wave of the sea-splitting halberd, blue light that covered the sky and shone with more than 200 types of laws and divine runes charged at Ji Tianxing. It was fortunate that they were fighting in the void. If they were fighting in the Dragon Realm, the sky would have been torn apart by the sharp blue blades. The spatial barrier of the Dragon Realm would not be able to withstand such powerful divine power. Ji Tianxing was enveloped by the blue light and suppressed by more than 200 types of laws and divine power. He felt his divine body stiffen, his divine power blocked, and his battle prowess was greatly reduced. Fortunately, his movements in the void were not restricted, and he had a natural advantage. Seeing the blue blades coming at him, he instantly retreated 100 miles to avoid the sharp blades. He held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and slashed with all his might. Like a golden divine dragon, it charged at God King War Whale. Heavenly Dragon Slash. The holy golden dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it viciously tore apart the blue blades of light that filled the sky. Unfortunately, when the holy golden dragon shattered the sharp blades that filled the sky, its power was also exhausted. God King War Whale only swung his halberd and shattered the golden dragon. The two of them were evenly matched, and neither of them had the upper hand. God King War Whale swung his halberd again and instantly shot out 96 icy-blue light pillars that formed a formation and blasted at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing countered in an orderly manner, slashing out more than 200 sword lights, clashing with War Whale Deity King. The divine powers that the two of them used collapsed again. Neither of them was injured. Ji Tianxing immediately used the 10 directional vanishing shadows and his body split into 8, creating 7 clones. He and the 7 clones worked together to form the 8 extreme battle formation and surrounded God King War Whale, attacking fiercely. God King War Whale had seen the power of this divine power when they were fighting in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, so he naturally did not dare to underestimate it. However, he did not panic and quickly took out 9 calming divine pearls, which circled around him. Each of the 9 calming divine pearls was a superior-grade king-level divine artifact. They could form an array to form a shield and release the power of a divine array to kill enemies. Under the protection of the 9 divine pearls, God King War Whale was like a tiger that had grown wings. He could deal with Ji Tianxing and the 7 clones more easily. Both sides engaged in a fierce battle in the sky, exchanging blows back and forth. Every single move was extremely exquisite and possessed extraordinary might. The aftermath of the two of them fighting was like ripples that spread in all directions, creating layers of ripples in the vast void. Unfortunately, there was no audience for this marvelous battle. If there were other God King experts present here, they would surely be dazzled and fascinated by this scene, and they would be filled with admiration. After all, this was a battle between the top experts of the Starsource continent and even the entire Dragon Realm. Many divine lords and divine kings might not be able to see it with their own eyes in their entire lives. Not to mention the dazzling light of the divine arts when the two of them were fighting, it was very enjoyable to watch. Just their understanding of divine powers, laws, and techniques were enough for many divine kings to learn and comprehend. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. Soon, 10 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing and God King War Whale exchanged 100,000 moves and both of them had used up almost half of their divine power, but they were still evenly matched. Both of them were slightly injured, but neither of them had the upper hand. God King War Whale gradually lost his patience and wanted to mock Ji Tianxing before thinking of a way to retreat. However, he did not expect the primordial chaos bell to fly over from afar and join the battle. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3792. Ji Tianxing's strength was not enough to make God King War Whale wary. What he was truly wary of was the primordial chaos bell. When he was escaping from abstruse Grotto Heaven, God King War Whale used his consciousness to detect that Ji Tianxing had left the divine bell in abstruse Grotto Heaven to block the spatial rifts and void storms. Therefore, even if Ji Tianxing caught up to him and swore to defeat him, he was not worried. But it was different now. Under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, the spatial rifts and void storms in abstruse Grotto Heaven rapidly weakened. Under the restoration of the heavenly Tao laws, the spatial rifts quickly closed. Abstruse Grotto Heaven's spatial barrier had been restored, and the primordial chaos bell's mission was completed. It actually returned to Ji Tianxing's hands. He was like a tiger that had grown wings, and his combat strength increased greatly. God King War Whale's expression changed immediately, and he made up his mind to escape. Without the divine bell's help, Ji Tianxing could fight him to a draw. Now that Ji Tianxing had the divine bell, he was definitely no match for him. Swoosh! God King War Whale exchanged a blow with Ji Tianxing, and used the powerful impact to escape into the depths of the void. His speed was raised to the limit, and he turned into a faint blue light, traveling thousands of miles in an instant. But Ji Tianxing was already prepared. The moment he turned to escape, he cast a spell to activate the primordial chaos bell, and it expanded to a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The massive primordial chaos bell was as black as ink, and it seemed to have become one with the void. In just an instant, it covered a radius of 50,000 miles, sealing off the area. God King War Whale had just flown 40,000 miles when he was about to crash into the primordial chaos bell's wall. He reacted instantly, and he was shocked and angry. He could not help but curse, "Damn beast. Is he really going to kill me? What is he relying on? Isn't he afraid of forcing me into a corner?" As he cursed, he hurriedly stopped running, and he turned to look at Ji Tianxing with the sea-splitting halberd in his hand. He saw that in the void tens of thousands of miles behind him, Ji Tianxing was flying over unhurriedly. He was certain that Divine King War Whale would not be able to escape and would definitely be suppressed within the primordial chaos bell. There was a confident smile on his face. Deity King War Whale was also very calm. He released his divine senses and used his divine arts to observe the primordial chaos bell. He already knew how powerful the primordial chaos bell was, but this was the first time he was trapped inside it. Even though he knew that there wasn't much hope, he still wanted to give it a try. He wanted to see if he could break through the suppression of the divine clock and escape. He could clearly sense that not only was the divine bell incomparably sturdy and difficult to break, but it was also imbued with powerful laws and array Dao divine power. If they wanted to escape from the divine clock seal, it would definitely not be a simple matter. They would need to think about it at length. However, before he could further investigate the mystery of the god clock, Ji Tianxing flew over. Seeing that Ji Tianxing had no intention of communicating and was about to attack, God King Warwhale frowned and said in a low voice, "Long Tian, what are you trying to do? Your aggressiveness will do no good to the 10,000 Demon Alliance. I believe that you are not such a reckless person, either. If you have any conditions or requests, we can still talk about it." Ji Tianxing's unreasonableness gave God King Warwhale a headache. He felt that Ji Tianxing's actions were unreasonable. Even though Ji Tianxing had explained the reason was not sufficient. It was too far-fetched. God King Warwhale felt that Ji Tianxing must have some other scheme. It was just that he was unwilling to say it out loud. Hearing God King Warwhale's words, Ji Tianxing, who was about to attack, was stunned. He raised his eyebrows and said in a playful tone, "I have said many times that I only want to injure you and ask you to obediently go into seclusion for a few decades. Why don't you believe me? Why do you feel that I have other motives? Is that not the case? How can there be such a ridiculous reason?" God King Warwhale frowned and asked. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and said with a serious expression, "Since you don't want to fight and want to use other methods to solve this matter, I will give you a chance. As long as you agree to my 2 conditions, today's matter will be over. How about it?" God King Warwhale was silent. He thought to himself, "This despicable little bastard, he really has other motives." Although he was secretly relieved and felt that there was still room for negotiation, he was still wary. However, he was also full of vigilance. He was worried that Ji Tianxing would make an excessive request. After a moment of consideration, he nodded and said, "What are the conditions?" Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "First, you have to answer one of my questions truthfully. There must not be any deception." God King Warwhale frowned and seemed to want to bargain. Ji Tianxing added, "Don't worry, this question will not make you reveal any secrets, nor will it harm the interests of you and the Warwhale clan." God King Warwhale's brows relaxed when he heard that. He nodded and said, "I can agree to this. What's the second condition?" Ji Tianxing said with a playful smile, "You also know that the reason I pursued you so relentlessly is because I want you to rest for a few decades. Let's not beat around the bush. The Xuanji Grotto Heaven has been conquered, and the Star Source continent is ours. In the next few decades, we will be busy taking over the Star Source continent. We have no time to waste on you. So, you only need to swear a heavenly oath that you will not interfere with the myriad demon alliances' takeover of the Star Source continent for the next 100 years. You cannot become enemies with the myriad demon alliance, nor can you directly or indirectly interfere with this matter. In this way, this king's goal can be achieved, and naturally, I won't fight with you again. What do you think?" This. God King Warwhale frowned and fell into hesitation. His face was very dark, and his eyes flashed with anger. Obviously, he felt that being forced to swear a heavenly oath was a very humiliating thing. Previously, he learned from God King Wardragon that Xueshong was forced by Ji Tianxing to swear a heavenly oath that he would not attack Ji Tianxing. At that time, he felt that it was laughable, and even Xueshong snorted and looked down on him. He did not expect that in the blink of an eye, he would follow in Xueshong's footsteps and become a laughingstock. However, he was in a very passive position now. No matter how humiliating this condition was, he could not easily reject it. He had to weigh the pros and cons and consider the consequences of this matter. Ji Tianxing was not anxious and did not rush him. He patiently waited for his answer. His expression and attitude were very calm. Even if God King Warwhale did not agree to this condition, he did not care. At most, the negotiation would fall apart, and they would continue to fight. After about 20 breaths of time, God King Warwhale raised his head and looked at Ji Tianxing expressionlessly. The anger in his eyes had already dissipated. Clearly, he had suppressed the anger in his heart and made a choice. Long Tian, I can agree to 2 of your conditions, but you must keep it a secret and not reveal it to anyone. This is the agreement between you and me. Ji Tianxing was not surprised by God King Warwhale's conditions. After all, God King Warwhale was also afraid that he would reveal the news and embarrass himself, becoming the laughingstock of the Starsource continent. Chapter 3793. After God King Warwhale finished speaking, he stared coldly at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his reaction. Ji Tianxing revealed a playful smile and said, "Although I can understand your feelings, I'm sorry, but I can't agree to your conditions." You! God King Warwhale was enraged, his eyes flashing with fury. Terrifying killing intent burst out from his body, and he was about to turn hostile and break the agreement. Ji Tianxing, however, was not in a hurry. He continued, God King Warwhale, you need to be clear about your situation. You don't want to fight right now, so I'm giving you a chance to settle this peacefully. If you can't accept these 2 conditions, then we'll have to return to the previous topic and see who's stronger. Let's fight first. As he spoke, he activated the primal chaos bell and released a majestic aura, causing the pressure on God King Warwhale to multiply. God King Warwhale fell silent again, his anger and killing intent receding into his body. He frowned deeply, his expression dark as he pondered. His heart was clearly conflicted. Ji Tianxing knew that he was at a critical juncture, and the slightest mistake could change his mind. In fact, he was acting so forcefully because he knew what God King Warwhale was thinking. He didn't want to be buried with Enigma Grotto and wanted to protect himself. Now, he had forced God King Warwhale to a dead end. If Xiao Chen continued to pressure him, this peak divine king would probably get angry and start an intense battle for the sake of his dignity and face. Even if Ji Tianxing was confident that he could injure God King Warwhale with the primal chaos bell, he wouldn't have it easy either. Ji Tianxing didn't want to see both sides suffer. After all, he still had many things to do. Therefore, when he saw God King Warwhale so hesitant and conflicted, he said, God King Warwhale, although I can't agree to your conditions and help you keep this secret, I believe you. I'm not a talkative person, and I won't make a joke of this matter and spread it everywhere. This won't do me any good. You know that I only want the 10,000 Demon Alliance to take over the Star Origin continent smoothly. Why would I cause any trouble? Seeing that Ji Tianxing's words were reasonable, and his expression, eyes, and tone were sincere and calm, God King Warwhale couldn't help but believe him a little. But he was still a little worried, so he tried to say, but, you still have to give me a promise before I can be at ease. There was a difference between a promise and an oath. Of course, for top experts like him and Ji Tianxing, a promise was also very effective, second only to an oath to the heavens. After all, they were all peak divine kings, and also the few people with the highest authority and status on Starsource continent. Everyone cherished their reputation and reputation. No one would be a fickle and untrustworthy person, even Xue Shong, who did not have a dignified and domineering aura, did not dare to speak carelessly. Therefore, as long as Ji Tianxing made a promise in person, God King Battle Whale would feel much more at ease. Ji Tianxing stared at God King Battle Whale and analyzed his thoughts through his eyes and subtle expressions. After a while, Ji Tianxing was sure that this was God King Battle Whale's bottom line, and also the only thing that worried him. As long as this problem was solved, God King Battle Whale should be able to accept it calmly. Therefore, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said with a serious expression, God King Battle Whale, I can promise you that this matter will not be leaked. At most, I will only let a few people I trust know, and I will order them not to leak it. This. God King Battle Whale's expression eased a lot, but he fell into deep thought and did not immediately agree. Ji Tianxing looked at him calmly. His expression didn't change, and he didn't say anything. Obviously, he had already shown his bottom line by saying so much. God King Battle Whale was naturally aware of this. After pondering for a while, he finally sighed and nodded. Fine. I have no grudges with you or the Myriad Demon Alliance. I can only blame myself for taking a wrong step and helping Mysterious Grotto. Now that we've come to this conclusion, it can be said that we've settled our grudges. Ask away, Long Tien. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time and asked directly, more than 10 years ago, did you attack the lower realms? Or did you save or see a human youth? Lower realms? God King Battle Whale frowned, his face full of doubt and confusion. Although peak God Kings can comprehend the will of the heavenly Tao and condense a trace of the Tao, they are qualified to intervene in the lower realms. However, I was born in the Dragon Realm and grew up in the Dragon Realm. I have nothing to do with the lower realms. In fact, I have never even been to the God Realm, so why would I intervene in the lower realms' affairs? As for the human youth you speak of, I heard that the human race is an ancient race, right? Didn't they die out 30,000 years ago? Truth be told, I've never seen a human before in my life. God King Battle Whale's expression was rather strange. His gaze when looking at Ji Tianxing clearly had the meaning of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Originally, he even thought that Ji Tianxing was going to ask about some important matter, some secrets related to the Dragon Realm. He did not expect that he would actually ask such a nonsensical thing. Ji Tianxing observed his expression carefully. Seeing his reaction, he knew that he was not lying. Back then, Ji Tianxing returned to the Dragon Realm precisely to find Ji Wuhan. Although what abducted Wuhan across the realm back then was a golden dragon's enormous claw. But Ji Tianxing could not confirm that the one who abducted Wuhan was definitely a peak God King realm golden dragon. That golden dragon's enormous claw might just be a divine ability transformed from an arcane art. Therefore, every peak God King was suspicious. Even God King Battle Whale was no exception. It was precisely because of this point that Ji Tianxing thought of asking God King Battle Whale this question at the last minute. Since he was sure that God King Battle Whale had nothing to do with this matter, then he did not need to investigate God King Battle Whale anymore. Hence, he continued, God King Battle Whale, you should fulfill the second condition. The second condition was naturally to swear a heavenly Tao oath. Regarding the contents of the heavenly Tao oath, God King Battle Whale pondered for a moment and had an idea. He gathered his emotions, his expression becoming solemn, and was about to open his mouth to recite the oath. But Ji Tianxing suddenly reached out and interrupted him. Hold on. God King Battle Whale's open mouth immediately closed, forcefully swallowing the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianxing and asked with a frown, "What's wrong?" Ji Tianxing took out a jade slip and handed it to him with a playful smile, saying, "It's a heavenly Tao oath, so of course it has to be solemn and cautious. Don't say every sentence, even every word has to be carefully considered. What you thought of in a hurry is most likely not perfect and strict enough. I've already helped you think of the specific content of the oath. Just recite it according to this." God King Battle Whale was stunned on the spot. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost, his eyes glaring angrily at Ji Tianxing. That gaze seemed to be saying, "What the hell? You predicted this step long ago and even made preparations in advance just to scheme against this king?" Chapter 3794. Although God King Warwhale understood the truth, he was even more depressed and aggrieved than before. Especially when he saw the heavenly Tao oath that had been prepared in the jade slip, his heart collapsed and he was speechless. The heavenly Tao oath that Ji Tianxing had provided was actually long and detailed, with a total of over 1,000 words. The contents of the oath not only described in detail the promise that God King Warwhale had to fulfill, it also took into account all kinds of normal and abnormal accidents, and also limited and explained them. All in all, this was an oath to the Heaven Tao that was extremely perfect and detailed to the point of being horrifying. It was utterly impossible to pick out the slightest mistake from it, and it was impossible to take advantage of it. Your heavenly Tao oath is really strict enough. God King Warwhale held the jade slip and looked at Ji Tianxing with a complicated expression, gritting his teeth as he spoke. Ji Tianxing ignored his anger and said indifferently, it's good to be strict, this way you and I can both be at ease, and the heavenly Tao will also feel that we are sincere." God King Warwhale frowned and lowered his voice, saying in a contemptuous tone, "Long Tien, you are also a peak God King, don't be so mysterious. Do you think that a mere heavenly Tao oath can restrain people's hearts? You should know very well that other than those ignorant weaklings, the stronger one is, the less respect they have for the heavenly Tao." Ji Tianqing could not help but reveal a cold smile. "Since you do not respect the heavenly Tao and feel that a heavenly Tao oath cannot restrain you, why don't you hurry up and swear a heavenly Tao oath and end this matter?" God King Warwhale was speechless and his face flushed red. Indeed, he was like many God King experts, feeling that the concepts of heavenly Tao oath and heavenly Tao will were too illusory. After all, from ancient times until now, no one could say for sure what the heavenly Tao was. But the power of the heavenly Tao was real. No one could go against their conscience and say that the heavenly Tao did not exist. Therefore, everyone's mentality was very complicated, and they were skeptical of heavenly Tao oaths and rules. For example, Xue Shong was in such a situation and mentality during this period of time. He was very confused and very aggrieved. Many times, he wanted to ignore the heavenly Tao oath and fight to the death with Ji Tianqing. But when this thought appeared in his mind, his hands and feet would be tied, and he could not help but shrink back. God King Warwhale was silent for a moment before he suppressed his sullen and depressed emotions. At this point, he could not resist. He only wanted to end this as soon as possible and then return to the South Sea to cultivate in seclusion. He did not want to see Ji Tianqing again. This person was too hateful. Then, God King Warwhale held the jade slip and began to recite the heavenly Tao oath with a solemn expression. Ji Tianqing originally wanted to take back the primordial chaos bell to prevent the Tao runes of this divine artifact from affecting the heavenly Tao's senses. But he obviously worried too much. God King Warwhale's clear voice reverberated through the primordial bell. Soon, strands of Daoist rhymes appeared above his head and around him, and the will of the heavenly Tao descended. Clearly, even a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact like the primordial chaos bell could not block the detection of the heavenly way. When God King Warwhale was halfway through reciting the heavenly Tao oath, the heavenly way's senses had already formed. Around God King Warwhale, mystic rays of Daoist rhymes formed like lotuses. After a short while, when God King Warwhale finished reciting the heavenly Tao oath, thunder rumbled in the void, and the mighty power of the heavenly Tao descended. God King Warwhale's divine body and divine spark were enveloped by the power of the heavenly Tao, forming a connection with the heavenly Tao. This meant that the heavenly Tao oath had been formed and came into effect. Previously, God King Warwhale was still skeptical about the binding power of the heavenly Tao oath. But now, he personally felt the power of the heavenly Tao. That vast and mighty power that he could not muster the slightest bit of resistance caused his expression to change. His face was a little pale, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. There was also a trace of reverence and fear in his eyes. He did not doubt that if the mighty power of the heavenly Tao wanted to punish him, he would not be able to resist at all and would be reduced to ashes immediately. The will of the heavenly Tao, the heavenly Tao oath, it really does exist. God King Warwhale held the jade slip in his hand, watching the Tao charm gradually dissipate with a pale complexion as he muttered in his heart. After 10 breaths, the power of the heavenly Tao and the Tao charm already dissipated. Everything returned to tranquility. But God King Warwhale's heart was still surging with raging waves, unable to calm down. And at this time, Ji Tianqing was also frowning, currently pondering over a problem. Strange, God King Warwhale swore the heavenly Tao oath and indeed attracted the heavenly Tao law and power. It even bore a lotus-like Tao charm. But back then, when Xue Shong swore the heavenly Tao oath, there was no such activity at all? Could it be that the heavenly Tao oath I made Xue Shong swear was really too simple, and didn't receive the response of the heavenly Tao, so it didn't come into effect? Ji Tianqing knew that there would still be many opportunities to become enemies with peak divine kings in the future. But most of the time, if he could not kill a peak divine king, he had to restrain the other party's actions. Then, the heavenly Tao oath was the best choice. Through Xue Shong and God King Warwhale's experiences, He roughly figured out the way and also had a clear judgment on whether the heavenly Tao oath was effective or not. He felt that this matter could be studied more thoroughly. If he could grasp the correct way to open the heavenly Tao oath, it would definitely be much more convenient for him to do things in the future. Just as he was thinking, God King War Whale had already come to his senses and looked at him expressionlessly. He said, "Long Tien, I have already fulfilled my promise. Shouldn't you also?" God King War Whale did not say anything, only looking up at the huge primordial chaos bell. Ji Tianxing immediately collected his thoughts and did not say anything more. He raised his hand and put away the primordial chaos bell. Swoosh! The huge primordial chaos bell instantly shrunk to the size of a foot and floated beside Ji Tianxing. As he put away the divine bell, God King War Whale only felt the pressure on him suddenly decrease, and his entire body relaxed. He tidied his clothes, used his divine power to wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead, and turned to leave. He did not want to stay a moment longer, nor did he want to look at Ji Tianxing. He did not even want to say goodbye. However, Ji Tianxing put away the primordial chaos bell and reminded him, "God King War Whale, remember your promise today. For the next 100 years, stay in the South Sea obediently and do not interfere with the continent's affairs." Of course, God King War Whale remembered. Why did he need Ji Tianxing to remind him? He was unhappy and replied with some anger, Of course, I will fulfill my promise." Probably because he was angry, he could not help but ask, "Long Tien, although I will not interfere in this matter, don't forget that the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor is still safe and sound. When the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor returns, he will definitely take revenge on the 10,000 Demon Alliance. At that time, if the 10,000 Demon Alliance cannot resist, they will spit out what they have eaten. If you die in the hands of the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor, I will still be very happy."